Poker Stars has some weird stuff like that too.
There's Poker Stars in PA?
Yeah, they're own though.
Only in PA.
It's so shady.
I'm jealous.
Shady, it's great. And they have sports betting on Poker Stars too.
Sick.
When Furman wins by 60 today, I'll send the screenshots. Paladin season. It's the second time today I've heard this sort of shenanigan music.
People like it. Wait till you see what I have planned for Easter. We hot? Yeah. Saturday pigskin.
Ohio State is in a little trouble here.
Gorgeous Dong says, hell yeah. 4+ minutes of intentional hot mic.
We didn't make it this far in the song this morning. This is the
This is probably like the third time we're hearing it.
Yeah.
Pretty sure it's 2 minutes and it just loops.
That's what they want you to think. All right.
There's the loop.
Nothing better than sweating and under, you know? Just rooting for pure misery on the field.
You're a sicko. First time I met you in person, you were betting an under on a game of two teams that not like I'd heard of them and never seen them play. I'd never even heard of them.
Yeah,
at Connors out in California.
It was Texas San Antonio and Cal Baptist. I remember that. It went under.
That was the same weekend that you hit the 50K, but I was sweating the Eagles getting to the Super Bowl.
That was also when DraftKings used to have you roster defensive players, and I rostered Patrick Robinson, and he had
a pick six.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, against the Vikings.
Yep, 100%.
What a horrible idea that was.
Awful.
Guys, I have to bring it to you, but if you don't like the IDP, man, you don't love fantasy football.
And I hate fantasy football.
That was short-lived.
I've had a lot of people ask me season-long questions about IDP. I'm like, I know a couple people that do IDP. I'll just mention their names because I have zero idea.
Cleo Max looking sick this week.
Is there anything for offensive linemen?
That's about as bad as kickers.
Like they would lose points for every quarterback pressure or something.
Yeah, pancake season.
That's good. Yeah. They can only lose points. They can't gain points.
Sounds like my kind of format.
Dude, what if your offensive line scored a fumble recovery touchdown? That'd be pretty cool.
Oh, you just win the slate.
You gotta stack them with the quarterback.
It's over. Number 75 is now eligible.
Yeah, the Titans would be the best team in the league with all their stupid plays.
Taylor Loughran. What's going on, everybody? We're back so soon talking Saturday football. It's the Awesemo.com Saturday strategy show, followed by Live Before Lock. We got 2 straight hours of pigskin conversation leading you up to that 4:30 lock time here. DraftKings, FanDuel, No House Advantage, you name it, we got you covered. I'm Dave Loughran on Twitter at Laffy_D, LOUGHY_D. And joining me as always, of course, they'll be back with me tomorrow as well, breaking down an 11-game main slate. Ben Rasa, the jack of all trades, master of some, on Twitter at JazzRazDFS, double Z, single Z, and Alex Baker, number 1 ranked DFS player in the world, on Twitter at Awesemo DFS. Alex, man, 2-game slate. And I say we kick it off with a little strategy conversation because of what we've seen, some wild outcomes on these 2 gamers this season.
I like it, man. Yeah, it's crazy this year how every single slate there's like $1 million first prize, and you're competing with like 150,000 people, and you're picking between the same like 25 football players. It just is like a crazy experience.
It really is. I mean, even Ben, with showdowns, you have legitimate milli makers every week. If it's not that, it's 500K up top. Somebody just won $500,000 with Marcus Mariota as their quarterback. So at this point, who knows what's going on? Now, look, that is like I don't know what percent outcome that is, but I would not advise you to just start doing that. It was crazy, though, and I say on all of our showdown shows, we leave no stone unturned. Well, apparently we did. Let's hope we don't do that today.
I think the craziest thing about this is we've got these 2-game slates, we've got showdown and things like that, and it's always like, well, yeah, it's $1 million for first, but you're going to end up winning like $2,000 when you chop it 700 ways. And then half the time it's a solo winner, and it's not that crazy of lineup. And this is why I'm really excited to get into the strategy talk, because there are little things. It doesn't mean you're going to be unique, but I severely underestimated what you need to do to limit your dupes. And you can actually, on these 2-game slates, find ways where your lineup is actually pretty different. It's shocking considering the limited player pool.
Here's a perfect example, Alex, to what Ben was talking about. What about playing 6 Bills in one lineup? Because that won $1 million just a few weeks ago on the 2-game slate, because this guy played 5 Bills and the Bills defense special teams. I remember tweeting about it. It was absurd, but it won. And you want to talk about different. You don't get much more different than that.
Definitely. Yeah, I think I kind of like doing it again, running back the Bills stack. Like the thing is, like, it sounds crazy, and like if you have 6 Bills in your lineup, like including the defense, you're like looking at your lineup, you're like, this like seems like it has no shot to win. But then like you got to realize like every single lineup you enter like has such a little shot to win as well. What you really need for that to work is for a lot of the offense to be concentrated in the quarterback position, as well as you hit like maybe 1 or 2 guys as your one-offs that have most of the production for those teams.
So Ben, how do we approach something like this? We know Ricky D, well-known, very good player, won the Millie Maker with, I think it was 2 players against his defense on a 2-game slate, which really is not preposterous even a little bit. How about this on the Thanksgiving Day slate? Remember, we were supposed to have 3 games. We ended up having only 2 games. I was going over this today just to set this up so you can give the viewers a good idea of maybe ways to get different that you were referring to. 30, where is it? Oh, here it is. 29 of the top 30 lineups, or people that in the top 30, had 10 or fewer lineups, and 26 of 30 had 5 or fewer lineups on that Thanksgiving Day slate.
Yeah, it doesn't take much, and I always talk about this on 2-game slates. To me, it's a fine line. There are ways to be unique. I'll use Marcus Mariota. I think that's a terrible idea. Like you can be unique and do something that gives you virtually no chance. But there are other ways, and Alex has kind of brought this to the forefront. For example, omitting a team. Most ways people construct, even if they think it's going to be a beatdown, it's, I'll take one guy on the run back, and you have exposure to all 4 teams. So things like that, the team you omit, don't play the opposing defense, even though logically that would make sense. That's really going to change it up. There are little tweaks that you can make within a lineup that are going to be different than a lot of people that are doing a similar build. That's the trick. You're going to have a similar build no matter what you do. It's just, can you be a little different at the end? Can you dovetail at the end to give yourself a different out than everybody else?
And Alex, when we're talking about fantasy cruncher, right? Crunching lineups. If you're building them by hand, it's a little bit different. You can use our lineup builder as well to get different as well. See what your leverage or your contrarian ranking is and all of that stuff, built specifically to take down tournaments with lineups that differentiate themselves from the field. But when you're building lineups on Cruncher, and don't worry, guys, we're going to get right into the games here, but we all thought it was important to talk about this on a 2-game slate because the strategy is different than a main slate. It's also way different than a showdown slate. What are some ways and approaches that you would take as someone that uses Fantasy Cruncher to build lineups each day?
So one of the things you can do is just do a lot of separate crunches and see how many times each particular lineup shows up. The one thing I noticed today is that the dupe factor in this 2-game slate is a lot lower than previous 2-game slates and also showdown slates because there are like good ways to spend the salary. You actually have to make like choices today about like maybe you can take advantage of a really long shot value pick because of all the other players it allows you to pick. The last 2 games, it was more like a pick 'em where like guys that were like 2K flyers or 3K flyers like really weren't very playable. But today I feel like that's different. You can find some of those deep dives and succeed based on the other guys in your lineup going off.
Guys, dueling streams today. If you're trying to check out MMA content, well, that show should be going live any minute now at the Awesemo YouTube channel. If you're looking for that, you know where to find it. You can pop into that room. I assume they're going live any minute now. And then we've got this one as well, followed by Greg and Jeff with your live before lock, taking you all the way up to 4:30. And of course, we're happy to have you guys with us. Hit that thumbs up if you haven't done so yet, and help us get to 50K subscribers. We're getting close, Ben. We're getting real close. We're not going to hit 50K by Christmas, but we're getting close.
No, we're getting close, and every little bit helps. And like I said, I didn't realize that a lot of people who watch the streams don't subscribe to the YouTube channel. And it helps us, but it helps you guys as well. You hit the notification bell. You'll know when these other shows go live. We have a ton of content. I did a college football show this morning. There's a lot. College basketball will be coming soon enough. So definitely do that. We appreciate it greatly.
Yeah, if you like what we do here, maybe we help you out along the way, or you just enjoy our wonderful faces and personalities, assuming that's not the case. But if it is, subscribe to the channel. Help us get there. It's good for us. It's good for you. Let's get started. Alex, Buffalo at Denver. Only 2 games to touch on here, so we're going to do our best to hit on everything. The Buffalo Bills laying 5.5 points on the road, 48.5 point total against the Denver Broncos team that has actually been, playing a little bit better football lately. I almost said baseball and basketball, playing better football lately. The Buffalo Bills, though, without John Brown, and this is where I'll start you off. The Bills without John Brown this year in 5 games. Stephon Diggs has a 31% target share, 12 targets per game. Beasley's at almost 23% with 8.5 targets per game. Gabriel Davis with about a 15% target share at 5.6. So Stephon Diggs and Beasley just tearing it up, getting the lion's share of opportunities with John Brown out, and he will not be activated from the IR today.
Yeah, the Bills are really interesting because, man, like the running backs, they don't really have like a ton of games where they've been successful. And then at the tight end position, you have Dawson Knox, who isn't even like utilized very much either. So really like all the production is concentrated in the wide receiver position in Buffalo. And that's the situation we can definitely take advantage of. Their rotation is very easy to predict. With Braun out, I mean, Stephon Diggs basically has been playing every snap, while Cole Beasley and Gabriel Davis have been playing about 90% of the snaps. So, like, it's really those 3 guys that you target. And, I mean, maybe, like, Isaiah McKenzie is playing a few snaps a game. But that makes it really easy to figure out where the ball is going for the Bills.
Yeah, Ben, it really does. And as I mentioned, those target shares are pretty immense. Stephon Diggs getting peppered. I mean, really one of the most heavily targeted players in the league this season. But this Denver defense, while the team isn't particularly good, Denver has done a decent job. I mean, they're allowing bottom 5 yards per attempt to opposing passers, bottom 10 yards per game. Do you just throw that out the window on a 10-game slate like this, especially given how much we've seen Stephon Diggs involved in the passing game?
Yeah, I mean, we only have a couple passing attacks to attack, and Buffalo seems, I mean, their ability to do move the ball effectively through the air, I think kind of goes beyond matchup. Josh Allen in wins in recent weeks is still throwing the ball 40 plus times. The volume is there. He's got his receivers, Diggs obviously leading the way. So I don't think it's the best matchup in the world. Obviously outside in Denver's never the best, but it's not something I worry about. Clearly, Josh Allen is going to be, I mean, it's only 4 quarterbacks, but he's probably going to be up there for the guy I'd want the most.
What about the rest of these pass catchers for the Bills going up against Denver?
So, yeah, I mean, obviously with John Brown out, Gabriel Davis has stepped up, and the thing is he's maximizing his potential. He's finding the end zone. He's caught a touchdown in 3 straight games. That's probably just running hot, and that's certainly making it look a little better. The targets are there. He's going to have some opportunities, and then I guess McKenzie to a lesser extent. I do think, again, we're talking about 2-game slates. You're going to have to do things that aren't, I don't want to say logical, but you would never consider doing it on a larger slate. I will certainly try to get some Singletary or Zach Moss in there and hope that somehow works in addition to what I want in this passing attack. Those guys, it's very tough to predict them, but they could provide leverage within the Bills who are going to be a popular team to target.
Yeah, and another thing too, Alex, is Vic Fangio said the other day that, and I quote, they are depleted. The Broncos are depleted at cornerback to an extent he's never seen before. So they are just gutted at quarterback. Callahan, Bassie, Dawson, Tolliver, AJ Boy is out for that 6-game suspension as well. They're absolutely decimated here. And, while we're not huge on at least I know you specifically aren't big on the cornerback wide receiver matchups, there is something to be said for a team that has no healthy cornerbacks that many of us have ever heard of who are going to be playing today.
Definitely. I mean, Denver has had a strong defense in past years. That really hasn't been a huge factor this year for them. So yeah, the fact that they're depleted, that's a huge benefit to Buffalo. But yeah, I mean, the starting point's not even that good. I mean, Denver was only a little bit above average versus the pass and a little bit below average versus the run. So now if their cornerback depth is a lot worse, then maybe that's just going to add up to more passing yards for the Bills.
What do you think about their ground game? Actually, before we do that, where are you at on Noah Fant? Because his price point's one of the lowest we've seen all season. No, I'm sorry. Let me take that back. His price point is the lowest we've seen all season. This is the first time he drops below 4K on the year. Has he been spectacular? No. Is he a talented young tight end on a team that doesn't really have any specific preferred option, like a Stephon Diggs hauling in 30% of the targets? Yes, he is. And of course, it's a position that is going to be dominated by Robert Tonyan ownership. And then it really, from what I'm seeing, falls off a cliff.
Yeah, I really prefer Noah Fant to Tonyan. I think that's a good comparison because so I think when people look at Noah Fant, they're going to see his game log. He didn't even register any points last week. It looks like that's not even listed though, so I'm not sure if people realize that. But that was because he got injured right at the start of the game. So really wipe off last game where Nick Vannett played more of the snaps.
Yeah, he played only 5 snaps last week for what it's worth. Yeah,
exactly. So I think Noah Fant, people haven't heard from him in a while. His best game in the last month is 9.5 fantasy points, where Robert Tonyan has been getting about that or better every single game. Yeah, Robert Tonyan hasn't been below that number. So I think people are going to look at this tight end position. They're going to be like, man, Robert Tonyan is so much better than Noah Fant. But the underlying metrics tell a different story because Noah Fant has been targeted 20% of the time he's been out on the field, which has been about 2/3 of dropbacks. While Robert Tonyan has similar playing time, but he's only targeted 16% of the time. So I think as far as volume, Noah Fant probably is going to get more opportunities than Robert Tonyan. His quarterback play isn't as good though, so we'll see how it shakes out.
Yeah, and Ben, I'm intentionally going just pass catchers first in this game before we get to the running backs, given that it's an absolute mess. And I think Alex even tweeted about this not long ago. Gotta love this 2-game slate where every team is loaded at wide receiver and no one has running backs or tight ends. That's pretty much the case. So let's hit on all these pass catchers. And the general idea is, do you think this is going to be a game that is dominated through the air? We talked about Buffalo. I guess I could ask you this first. Is Josh Allen to you somebody that no matter what the matchup looks like, and it's good given that quarterback, that the dearth of options at quarterback that FanDuel has, is Josh Allen, before I do move on a little bit more to Denver, a top option for you at quarterback?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's someone that even if they fall behind, that's probably a good thing in games where they've won and they've been better this year. Like I said, the volume, just in the last 2 weeks, 40 plus passing attempts, those were both wins. So it's not like they're likely to control the ball. Now we're going to get to the backs in a second. And I do think that's interesting because if you ask most people, how does Buffalo win this game? It's probably because of Josh Allen and Diggs and those guys. That means that the running backs may be undervalued. And I am going to explore that, but to talk about I mean, Denver doesn't have the playmakers on the outside that these other teams do, so he's going to be relied on. And then you're kind of, I don't know if it's a roulette situation, but you've got Patrick, you've got Judy. I mean, Hamler with the old 3 targets, 2 touchdown game last week, that's obviously an anomaly. Judy would probably be my favorite. You know, his price is depressed a little bit, sub 4K at 3,900. Still explosive and obviously up and down rookie season, but I still believe that he's their best pass catcher right now.
Well, it's crazy you mentioned the KJ Hamler thing. Check this out. So since week 6, and I'm using that because that is the week that Drew Lock returned after a multi-week hiatus, right? Since week 6, Jerry Jeudy leads the team in deep targets, targets of 20 plus yards downfield with 20. That's not a bad number. He has 5 receptions on those and only 6 have been catchable, according to Pro Football Focus. Tim Patrick with 13, he's played 1 fewer game. So 13, 6 receptions, 6 were catchable. No touchdowns for either of them on deep attempts. The only one since week 6 with any touchdowns on deep balls is KJ Hamler, who has 6 targets, 2 receptions, both of them for touchdowns and 86 total yards.
Yeah, it's nothing against KJ Hamler. I just think that that's something that can swing quickly, high variance, of course. So on a 2-game slate, you're going to look for little things like that to try to, there's going to be a lot of casuals who, if they're looking for a cheap guy, they're going to say, oh, Hamler, a couple touchdowns last week, I'll go with him. To me, I'd gladly rather find $400 and get to Judy, $800 to get to Patrick.
What about you, Alex? Outside of Noah Fant, and you've got some people in chat saying, hey, Robert Tonyan is the number 1 tight end, and it's not even close. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. He definitely has solid touchdown equity. He's scored in 4 straight games. He's a top 5 fantasy producer at his position this year, but he hasn't seen more than 5 targets since week 8, and he's seen more than 5 targets only once since week 6. So, or 3 times on the season. So do you want to go a little bit more into depth on why you like Noah Fant more than Robert Tonyan before we close it out with some of these receivers for Denver and then get to the running backs?
Yeah, definitely. To be clear, it's not like I see a huge difference in like the projection for both of them, although I do have Noah Fant projected higher. The thing with tight end is like they don't get quite as many targets as a normal position. So Robert Tonyan kind of is your average tight end that is targeted 16% of the time he's out there. A lot of snaps he's blocking, and as you said, he's not getting more than 5 targets, except in rare instances where Jerry Jeudy is a focal point of the offense. He has the 3rd highest target share on the team. So I think the opportunities for Noah Fant are a lot better, and he's a much more talented player, like a much higher like prospect. If Aaron Rodgers were throwing to Noah Fant, there would be no debate that he was much better than Robert Tonyan. Drew Lock is not Aaron Rodgers. He's not able to deliver the ball to Noah Fant with as high accuracy, and it shows in the efficiency numbers. But the number of opportunities will be higher on average for Fant compared to Tonyan.
So what are you doing with the rest of the Denver Broncos? Target share, the allotment of opportunities has been pretty spread out. You've seen a couple double-digit target games for Jerry Jeudy, even a couple for KJ Hamler, but it is a little bit difficult to predict who's going to get the majority of work each week. with salaries, matchup, etc. How do you figure this one out and square this away when building your lineups for a 2-game slate?
So I think salary, to some extent, is less of a factor. It's more about just, there's like a trade-off between picking all the best plays, which are the highest salaries, and then getting a little bit different. So in the largest field tournament, the Millie Maker, one of my strategies this week is definitely leaving a ton of money on the table. We saw with that Bills onslaught that guy had like 7,000 on the table. I don't think you have to go that far in every lineup to make a unique lineup, because when I was crunching, I was able to come up with about like 100,000 different lineups that were somewhat in the realm of possibility, using a lot of tabs.
Wow.
So there's definitely like a lot of ways to combine these players. So you, like in this particular slate, I think maybe just leaving like 2 to 3K on the table, that will really reduce your dupe factor in this Millie Maker.
So Ben, we know that if X Drop Roses is in the chat and it is any slate where the Broncos are playing, this dude's going to be on Drew Lock. And I can assure you that today he's all over Drew Lock against this Buffalo Bills team. You're a big Drew Lock guy, at least you were. And we've seen some positives here. The Denver Broncos have more turnovers, more giveaways than any other team in the league, but 13 are Lock, some were Driscoll, some were, what was it? What was his name? Who was the other guy in there? Brett Rippin, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Rip.
Former Boise State great. Yeah.
It was Brett Rippin. It doesn't matter who comes in there. They're going to get picked off. But yeah, no team's turned the ball over more than Denver this year. The interesting thing about Drew Lock is his last 3 games that he's played. Of course, didn't play in week 12. You had as you would say, creative player in there because of the COVID situation. I'm throwing that game out the window. But here's an interesting stat for you. The last 3 games Lock has played, the Broncos, believe it or not, are 2-1. He has attempted 30 or fewer passes in all 3 of them. The 4 previous games, they go 1-3, right? And he attempted 40 plus passes in all of those games. So game flow, game script has been massively important for this Denver Broncos team. And when we get to the running backs, you'll see exactly why. They want to run the ball. They don't want to throw the ball. But when they get themselves in a hole like they did against KC or against Atlanta or against the Raiders, they are forced to throw the football, which then makes Drew Lock somewhat interesting.
No doubt. I mean, you want him. We saw that script. They were behind, they were not even remotely competitive in most of those games. And then he would make pseudo fourth quarter comebacks and really rack up the stats. Now,
I was all over him on that Atlanta game, and going into the fourth, I'm like, oh, this looks really bad. And then he finished as the highest scoring quarterback, straight garbage time. Yeah,
because Atlanta, they almost lost that game. I remember it quite well. This is a weird slate because Alex wrote this up at the beginning of the show. Unlike the last slate, salary actually, you can't just click in Devontae Adams and Aaron Jones and Allen and Diggs and then like you still have unlimited money. So there is an opportunity cost, and that makes Drew Lock appealing because if he can stay even close to the other quarterbacks, you actually can use that money elsewhere to make a difference. So in raw points, if Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers only beat him by a handful, you're going to have a mid-range receiver against other people's punts. You're going to have Tanya Fant against a min tight end. So things like that can make a difference. You can basically do a cheap Broncos stack and then one off with anyone you want. And I don't think that's the craziest idea, especially if they fall behind.
All right. So Alex, the part we've all been waiting for, the running back positions for both of these teams. And by the way, all of our shows available in podcast form. You don't want to listen to these in podcast form because they have to be uploaded afterwards. But all of our stuff that has a shelf life, you want to go to Apple iPod or podcast, you want to go to Spotify, any of them, we got you covered. AWESEMO. Be sure to check that out. And also check the giveaway out that we're doing over at Awesemo_com on Twitter. It's a good one. It's very simple as well. All you have to do is submit a 5-star review of our NBA DFS podcast channel and follow the instructions on the graphic at our Twitter handle. It's the pinned tweet to win a Awesemo Plus year of NBA content, $400 value. That's all you have to do. And be sure to tag your favorite Awesemo host in the replies. Thank you in advance when you do. Yeah, so one random winner will be selected among 5-star review submissions. So thank you for that. And our way of saying thank you is hopefully one of you guys comes away with that $400 Awesemo Plus NBA subscription for the entire year. Okay, what are we doing with the backfield? Ben, I'll go to you here. What are we doing with the backfield? We'll start with Denver. Melvin Gordon and Philip Lindsay have been almost splitting work, but Melvin Gordon has been way more efficient than he has over the past several weeks.
Yeah, it has. Looks like they're both going to play. And they, like you mentioned, they want to run the ball. I don't know how long they'll be able to do it if they fall behind. Both guys going to get some work. I lean to Melvin Gordon. I'm not super interested in either, to be honest, though. I think for me, they're kind of priced, especially Gordon, north of 5K in no man's land. I know it's a weak position, clearly. You got to take two of them at minimum. So I'll have a little Gordon, but the Broncos backfield is not a spot I want to attack. I do think that if I was going to go to Denver, it would be through the air with the cheaper receivers.
Okay. Alex, again, Melvin Gordon over the last 4 games, I think it is. Or so hold on, where is it? Over the last 4 games, 55 carries, 314 rushing yards, and 2 touchdowns, 5.7 yards per attempt. Philip Lindsay, 50 attempts, so only 5 fewer, 154 yards, less than half of the production, basically, and 3 yards per attempt. So I don't know what to do here. It's like if Melvin Gordon didn't have any obstacles in his backfield, I'd really like him today, given his efficiency recently and the fact that they want to run the ball, but Philip Lindsay won't go away.
Definitely. Denver has a tendency to run a little bit more than your average team, so that sounds like a good situation for the running backs. But then you look at the workload split, and over the last 6 weeks, Philip Lindsay had more rushing attempts than 2. Melvin Gordon had more rushing attempts than 4, but it was pretty close in every week except 1. So I think that it's going to be hard to see who gets more opportunities. Melvin Gordon, as you mentioned, he's been converting a lot more of these opportunities into meaningful numbers. So I think he's going to be by far the more popular option on the team. I think maybe it's a good move to play Lindsay as a contrarian play with that in mind, because I feel like people are going to look at that game log and it's pretty ugly. He hasn't gotten more than 10 points since like October. So I kind of like playing Lindsay as a contrarian play. I don't mind Gordon, but you could stack them both up and just hope that the Bills lose this game by a lot.
Yeah, my thing, Ben, is with Melvin Gordon, 5,200 on DraftKings, got him projected around 25% ownership. That's not an absurdly high ownership mark here on a 2-game slate. The question is, like, do you think this game stays competitive? Can Denver keep it close? Because if they do, I don't think you or myself have any doubts that they're going to look to run the ball as much as they can.
No, they're definitely going to look to do that. And even if they lose, it's not like they're going to abandon the run in the second quarter. Like, they're going to run the ball. I just don't really like the options that were presented there. And we have a similar situation on the other side. To me, that's much more interesting to explore. If I'm going to take running backs, I'd rather go to the Bills side of it.
Well, you know what? Perfect segue. Kick it off. Bills running backs. We'll close the game with this.
So they're a little cheaper. You got Moss at 4,500, Singletary at 41. So that's 8,600 total. If you think for some reason they decimate him on the ground, that's very contrarian, obviously. And I just want to highlight Zach Moss. I wrote my daily prop of the day about him, over 38.5 rushing yards. This is a guy, he had 13 carries for 43 against Pittsburgh in week 14. You look at San Francisco, he had 3 carries for 9 yards. He had an early fumble and they just give up on him. So that is obviously some risk, but you know what? If that happens, you're going to have to burn those lineups. But I'm willing to take that he could get around 10 carries in a spot like this. He had 9 in week 12 for 59 yards. Good matchup. I think he's a pretty good running back if he gets the volume. I think this is a good spot for Zach Moss at 4,500.
Alex, Buffalo backfield. It's just truly a mess at this point, but I do get what Ben's saying. Especially they're almost touchdown favorites here. It's just a very unpredictable snap count. The other week, Singletary had like 85 to Moss's 15, and then the next week it flips and Moss plays 60 or something, and Singletary plays 40.
Definitely. I think what we're seeing is a hot hand situation where the team really doesn't have a great idea of a hierarchy between these two guys, because it seems like every week it's different who's getting more of the rushing attempts. So with that in mind, maybe you want to go with the lower owned, because I feel like both of them are like fairly talented. I mean, Zach Moss was a 3rd round pick, and then Singletary was a 3rd round pick the previous year. So it's not like there's a huge skill differential here other than Singletary having 1 year on Moss. So I think just going off the game logs, both will be pretty unpopular because Buffalo doesn't get much done on the ground. But Zach Moss in particular, man, he's not been doing anything. So I kind of like him as option at running back, where I think today you might only need about maybe like 15 points out of your guy to crack the optimal.
Yeah, look, both of these guys are really cheap. And here's the thing, Alex. We saw somebody win a milli with a Devin Singletary lineup, right, just a couple weeks ago. I think it's probably important that when we're looking at this with no Christian McCaffrey, Aaron Jones, who we'll get to shortly or in just a minute from now, it's not exactly like he's been lighting the world on fire either. That's not to say he's not a great play, but could Aaron Jones finish with another 12, 13 fantasy point game and disappoint? Yes. Mike Davis, outside of that start to the season, he has been much less impressive. And while it's a good matchup on the ground against Green Bay, there's no saying that this game doesn't get away from Carolina. And you can't predict any of these backfields other than that. So I guess what I'm saying is Devin Singletary could score 12 points like he did a couple weeks ago and definitely be in the optimal with how weak running backs are, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, are Mike Davis and Aaron Jones going to put up a big score, or are they not? Because if one of them doesn't, it's going to be one of these running backs that's a lot less reliable, that is going to be in the best lineups.
And a lot cheaper, you know? Ben, close this game out for us. Anything else on Josh Allen, on the quarterbacks? Floor is yours.
No, just to add to that final point, again, I'll go back to that this specific slate, salary is important. So Aaron Jones may outscore these guys, but if it's not by a lot, the opportunity, we're not really focused more on raw points in some of these situations because you're not able to do that. So there might be permutations where Aaron Jones outscores these guys, but the money you had to pay to get him didn't allow you to pay up at some of the other spots that you really need. So I feel very comfortable rolling the dice, particularly with Zach Moss today. He is not nearly, looking at our ownership projections, he is not nearly as popular as I think he should be. Of course, the floor is non-existent, but I don't really care about that when you're trying to beat hundreds of thousands of people.
Alex, last thing. You didn't get to talk much on Josh Allen. Is there anything you want to say about him before we move on?
Definitely. Josh Allen is my favorite quarterback of this slate. I mean, I don't think that's going to be a hot take at all. I'm projected to be the highest top sack odds of 44%. And that tool is free today and tomorrow, so make sure to check out the top stacks. The thing I particularly like about stacking up the Bills is the number of options that are viable. Green Bay, of course, a terrific offense, but with Devontae Adams representing such a large portion of the offense through Rodgers, it makes it difficult to build a lineup that's going to be differentiated because, I mean, everyone's going to have Devontae and then maybe pick another guy or two off the team. Whereas fading Diggs, although he's still a tremendous player, at least Beasley has the possibility of being the higher scoring between the two, and Gabriel Davis outside chance. So I think that there's just more ways to get unique with your Bills stack compared to a Green Bay stack.
All right. Love it. One down, one to go. Before we do, I'm sure you guys have heard of it, but if you're new and you haven't checked out our sponsor, No House Advantage, well, here's a perfect day to do so. They've got a 4K GPP paying out $2K to first. Now, is it DraftKings type money? No, but it's legitimate money that you could be winning. Now, can you win on DraftKings or FanDuel? Of course you can. but your chances of doing so at No House Advantage are way better. And one of the reasons too is, well, we have free projections on the site every single day, entirely free. Here's what it is. It's prop betting, peer-to-peer prop bets. So what you'll get is, so let's do this. Let's go over to awesemo.com, fellas. And by the way, while we're doing this, be sure to use the promo code Awesemo if you want to sign up. When you download the No House Advantage app, check it out. Use the promo code Awesemo to get up to $20 in the deposit bonus when you do, and another $5 for referring your friends. So you can have $25 right there just by signing up. But Ben, you have, let's say, Drew Lock interceptions. He's at 0.5. We have him projected north of 1 interception. So this is like a very easy way to make decisions when building your quote unquote lineups for these contests. Cole Beasley, they have him at 55.5 receiving yards. We have him well above that. Really, all you're doing is comparing one to the other. And as you pointed out all the time, I'll let you touch on it for a second here. These lines don't move throughout the week, whereas they would on actual sports books. So you can take advantage of that and get an actual legitimate edge playing at No House Advantage.
Huge edge, because once again, especially this late in the year, say Melvin Gordon or someone just wasn't going to play. Well, if they had a prop on Phillip Lindsay at the sports books, they would all go off the board and they would adjust to reflect that. At No House Advantage, it doesn't adjust. So you can go in, and there's a lot of people that play there that don't pay attention to these things. So you can lean on the books and lean on Alex's projections to really rack up some money. Like you said, is it DraftKings money? No, but you can take that money and then use some of it to take some shots at millies. There's no reason you can't do both. So just looking at some of the books right now, like Drew Lock, I'm looking right now on OddsShopper, and so we have him. I mean, the books have him minus 260 at some of these places to throw over 0.5 interceptions today. These are the type of props at the top that you really want to take advantage of. And like I said, it's an easy way to potentially rack up some money that you can use elsewhere.
And as I mentioned earlier, no team has thrown more interceptions as a team, of course, but then Denver. And a lot of that, Alex, has to do with the fact that, well, these receivers have had some terrible drops that have resulted in interceptions as well. If you've watched any of these games, I know our boy Drop Roses has. Maybe that's why it's X Drop Roses. I didn't think about that as a Broncos fan, because his team just dropped so many. That makes sense. I didn't put those together. But yeah, look, what do you like this week? Over at No House Advantage, Alex? Any prop bets you like that could get us started off on the right foot?
Definitely. I mean, the big thing on No House Advantage is they don't have that juice like you guys were talking about with the interception over being at even odds instead of at minus 250. So I think what I'm looking at is Melvin Gordon. They have a rushing touchdown prop for him. And the odds that any player gets a touchdown on any day are really not that good, especially when you have an average player like Melvin Gordon. So I'm going to take the under. Just hope he stays out of the end zone. Hope that Phillip Lindsay maybe vultures some touchdowns. And I think that's a pretty good shot at hitting.
All right. Use the promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, to get up to $20 upon your first deposit, and another $5 for referring a friend. Download the No House Advantage app today. All right, fellas, Carolina, Green Bay Packers. Ben, you've got the Green Bay Packers, unsurprisingly favored by 8 points, but a 53-point total here. Christian McCaffrey sidelined, or I guess he's still doubtful. I don't know. It's unfortunate. Got him in a dynasty league. Really could have used it. But I guess we can start with the Panthers, whose target shares, if we kick it off with wide receivers and quarterback, 27% Robbie Anderson target share this year. He has become the number one receiver on this team. DJ Moore is just north of 21% and Curtis Samuel at 17. He's expected to be a legitimate game time decision here. So we'll pay close attention to that. Do you like anything for the pass catching side of the Carolina Panthers today as 8-point dogs?
So it's obviously very difficult to, prioritize who you want to target here. So when I get situations like this, especially on a short slate, I go to game theory. Step one, this is the late game. People aren't going to be paying attention. If Curtis Samuel is ruled in, that's very interesting, because a lot of people are waiting and they say, I'm not going to bother with the Q tag. I'll just play DJ Moore. I know he's going to be in there. So right there, I'd roll the dice with Curtis Samuel. If you're able to pay attention, you can plan some lineups with that and shift around. Robbie Anderson, probably my preferred guy, but I think that's everyone's preferred guy on the team, 6,200. But the Curtis Samuel news, the Q tag, that depresses ownership. And that's the kind of thing again. 2-game slates, there's only so many things you can do. That's one of them.
Mike Davis projected for a boatload of ownership, Alex, so we're going to spend some time there. But as far as the wide receivers go, really don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time at the tight end position with the Carolina Panthers. But feel free if you want to talk about Ian Thomas and his hopeful 2 targets. But anyway, DJ Moore back, activated from that COVID-19 reserve list. For now, I'm going to assume that Samuel's playing. And then, of course, Robbie Anderson leading the team in targets and fantasy points this season at the position.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, Carolina has some good talent at wide receiver, and they've been fairly efficient this year with Bridgewater averaging 7.6 yards per attempt. They had a big start to the season, but none of them have really had crazy performances recently. But a matchup versus Green Bay could be the cure for that because first, Carolina plays at a very slow pace. If they're playing against the offense and they're trailing, they're going to have to pick that pace up, which would be good for the stack. And I think that you got Robbie Anderson is kind of like the number one guy where he's been getting a ton of targets, converting them at a very good efficiency, where DJ Moore is more of a deep threat that is more boom or bust. On a 2-game slate, it doesn't really matter if a guy gets 20 points or 40. So that would make me want to go to Robbie Anderson as my number one guy. But I like where Ben is going with Curtis Samuel, where he is a game time decision. Now, if he doesn't play, the late swap's going to be very difficult because Brandon Zylstra is the guy that was seeing snaps, and he hasn't done anything. So that's one tough part about it. But I like Curtis Samuel if he plays. I guess you could swap to MVS or Alan Lazard as well. So definitely in play. And I think that as you're saying, Laffy, people they're not gonna, or Ben, maybe is he other side, but you guys don't want to late swap. They want to just pick their lineup and roll with it. And the fact is, if you click on Curtis Samuel, it's telling you there's not a good chance he's going to play. That's going to be enough of a deterrent to depress his ownership. And I think that will make him a nice under-owned play.
Okay. Yeah, and Ben, just one more thing. Curtis Samuel is actually tied with Robbie Anderson in red zone looks this season, despite playing one fewer game. So while he's not a target monster, he definitely has been involved inside the 20-yard line for this team, which I think is pretty important considering the price point and projected ownership.
He also, not that it's a lot, but he has at least one carry in every game. He gets involved in weird ways, gadgety kind of guy. So worth a shot. They're going to be trailing. If he is ruled out, though, I would pivot probably. If I didn't have multiple guys where I could change some things around, I would go to a Packer. I would not play another receiver for the Panthers.
Like an MVS maybe, or Alan Lazard?
Definitely.
Okay. Yeah. And honestly, let me ask you this, because this could be a situation that pops up. I think we're going to be okay. I think he's going to play, but these games are spaced out. What if you had Noah Fant at tight end, and then you, first of all, oh, by the way, if you're hand building, put Curtis Samuel in your flex. Put him in your flex. Don't screw that up. You'll be kicking yourself for it afterwards. If you're crunching lineups, you'll always have the late game and the flex, but it doesn't matter in the spot like this if you have multiple from this game. So put him in your flex. Ben, even Robert Tunyon's $4,500. I think you could do worse than that with the red zone equity or touchdown equity we've seen from him.
Yeah, you'll have options. It's not going to be perfect, but again, these are the risks you have to take. And most likely you're going to have more than one guy left. So there's going to be a lot of things you could do to switch it around. And my guess is I think he's going to play. So I'm not really worried about these things. These are backup plans. If I have to swap, that means what my idea did not work, and I'll have to roll the dice even more.
What are you doing with Mike Davis right now coming in at ownership north of 65%? Him and Aaron Jones just pulling away with ownership for reasons that we've touched on multiple times already throughout the show.
Yeah, it's such a thin position, and you have to roster two, at least. So I get it. The volume keeps him in place. Certainly he has the pass catching upside, and it's gone away at times, but at the same time, in a game script like this, it's very reasonable that he has north of 5 targets and he racks up some easy production Those raw points can get there, especially if, the two situations we talked about in Buffalo and Denver don't produce much. He could be in the optimal with 11 points. That's possible. So I get why he's very popular. I don't love the play, though. I definitely think if you want to leverage against him and you have other guys, for me, it's Zach Moss. I'd gladly go elsewhere.
Okay. Alex, your thoughts on chalky Mike Davis? It feels like he's been chalk, more than half of the season this year?
Yeah, I mean, there was that 1 week where he was like 4,500 that everyone remembers. That was brutal because he got injured. But I think Mike Davis is as safe as anyone on the slate because of his PPR production. The one thing is the Panthers have used 3 running backs in the past couple games, with Trenton Cannon being the third and Rodney Smith getting a decent amount of carries as the second running back. So it's not like Mike Davis is a workhorse like he was at the start of the season, but he did run routes on 69% of dropbacks, a very nice number last week. I mean, that's as high as you're going to get out of a running back. So when you factor in he's getting targeted at a high rate when he's out there running, because Bridgewater doesn't scramble as much, that's just going to add a floor where you don't need a huge performance out of running back today. You just need him to get his average of 15.
Peter Hadley with the super chat. Thank you. He had asked earlier, Alex, how do you flex the late game on Fantasy Cruncher? I know they just auto flex the late games, but I don't know if you can set something up where it's like, if Curtis Samuel's in there, flex him. Can you? Yeah,
you
can?
No, I don't think you can, but it does automatically put someone from the 4 p.m. game in the flex. So
8 p.m. for today.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry. If you do have Curtis Samuel and someone else in the flex, you'll still be able to make some swaps.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just move them out. Good point. All right. Let's keep this one moving. We've got about 13 minutes to go. Ben, do you have anything else for Carolina? Any additional thoughts on Teddy Bridgewater before we get to these Green Bay Packers?
Not really. Listen, it's 4 quarterbacks, so you can obviously make a case. I'm not really into Bridgewater. I'm trying to go get just the best quarterbacks. That's kind of how my rosters fell. They have no tight end Ian Thomas is the only reason I would go there is that you have the problem is, I would say the only reason I'd go there is if you have a build where you want to pay up everywhere else. That's the only permutation that really works though, logically, and people are going to do that. So you're either just leaving a lot of money on the table and you think that he can raw points outscore guys like Fant and Tanyan, and to me, that's a stretch.
All right, Alex, Teddy Bridgewater, final thoughts?
He's been having a good season, has interesting options to throw to, and he's up against a tough team, so that makes me like him. But I do prefer Josh Allen quite a bit, because Josh Allen, a much better quarterback, and also the team is more pass heavy. So I feel like I'd probably go to Josh Allen first, Bridgewater, and Lock maybe second.
All right. JJ Nelson on Twitter says, Laffy, and damn it, Awesemo DFS, you got me shook about the Tanyan Fant debate. In season long, I got to go Tanyan. I didn't know it's a season long question, but would you go Tanyan today in season long?
This is for versus Fant.
Yeah.
Man, I kind of prefer Fant. But
all right.
I think
you just rocked this guy's world. Let me tell you, he doesn't know what's up and down anymore.
Well, the thing is, Tanyan, he's been running really hot on extreme efficiency. He's caught 88% of his passes. That's going to make him look better than Noah Fant, that's caught 66%. But I don't think 88% is actually a possible number to land on in the long term. So I think when you factor in his touchdown rate, which is insane as well, I just feel like he's been running super hot this season, where Fant is a more reliable option.
All right, fair enough. Alex, we'll stick with you here, moving it over to Green Bay. And then remember, stick around after this show. I'll tell you why. Because coming up at 3:30 all the way to 4:30, it's Greg, it's Jeff, live before lock, another hour there's no other place you need to be right now for this content. So Geoff Ulrich, Greg Ehrenberg taking you up till 4:30, giving you that fine tune, those tweaks right after us. Okay, Alex, let's start it with, actually, I want to start with Aaron Jones here. And here's why. He's playing in 5 games since him and Jamal Williams have both been healthy because, one was out, the other was out with COVID, right? 5 straight games now that they've been healthy. Jones is averaging 14 attempts, 3.6 targets per game. Williams is averaging 9 attempts, 1.6 targets per game. Snap counts about 60 to 42. But the weird thing is, when you watch these games, it just feels like Williams is uncomfortably involved. Too much for someone like Aaron Jones when it'd be different for me if Aaron Jones was, I don't know, 6,500, 60, but he's 7,300. I get why he's the chalkiest player on the slate. I'm not trying to take anyone off of him, of course. But Aaron Jones is undoubtedly priced like a running back that doesn't have competition in the backfield. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, Aaron Jones, I mean, he's not like a top tier running back in fantasy, in my opinion.
You hated him all season because of his price.
Definitely. I mean, he's another guy that's run really hot on touchdowns over the past year and a half. And one of the reasons I don't like him is the split with Jamal Williams, where maybe Aaron Jones is seeing like about two-thirds to 60% to 2/3 snaps every week, which is good, but not at the same level as top tier running backs. But when you're comparing him to Devin Singletary and Melvin Gordon, like, I think that's when you're understanding why Aaron Jones is like two-thirds of the lineups, because man, those guys are brutal. Like, it's like the same situation, but worse, like worse team, worse talent individually, and even more of a timeshare. So I think Aaron Jones is someone I'm going to definitely lean on in this slate, just because he's the best running back on the slate.
Yeah, Alex kind of said it, Ben. It's a bigger slate. I don't know, even against Carolina, how much Aaron Jones any of us would have, but at 7,300. But, our options are limited at running back, and that's an understatement.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, it's the same story with Mike Davis, but even more. Somebody's got to be. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Someone has to fill those 2 running back spots in the optimal. So Aaron Jones, there's a lot of ways he's not super effective, and he still gets there. Packers are a team that they're pretty concentrated with what they do. The running backs are obviously a little different. You've got Adams on the outside. We all know that. So I'm playing him. I don't love it. If it was a larger slate, it wouldn't have a ton of interest, but I do think he'll be effective enough to get the job done.
I have to ask you about Jamal Williams because it's a short slate and he's spoiled many nights for all of us, I think. His snap counts over the past couple of weeks, 30, 34, 46, 50, 48. That's since returning. He missed a game in week 9. Snap count has gone down in each of the last 2, but he did play, again, 48, 50, right around 50% in 3 straight weeks before these last 2 weeks. So is there any merit to getting there, or would it just be wiser to go with a Singletary or someone else in a similar price point, like Melvin Gordon, who's only $400 more expensive too?
So I totally get it. And I mean, the good thing about if you do go to Williams, he comes directly at the expense. Now, in theory, they both could have games, but if Jamal Williams has a huge game, most likely Aaron Jones is going to be in some trouble, and you're directly killing those lineups, which is nice. I still prefer the other options. He actually has, that's the one range for running backs that actually has some competition. You've got Gordon, you've got Moss, you've got Singletary, you've got Lindsey, all within a similar price point. So it's not like he's on an island by any stretch.
Alex, any thoughts on Jamal Williams behind Aaron Jones today against the Panthers?
Yeah, I think he's always an interesting boom or bust option, but I'm seeing on our ownership projections, he's 14% owned, while Zach Moss is also around 14%. So, like, even though these guys are more long shots, they're still picking up good ownership. The one backup running back, I guess you could say that I'm interested in based on the ownership percentages is Philip Lindsay. He's coming in at about 1/3 of the ownership of both of those guys. And I feel like the role for Lindsay is probably the second highest in that bunch, where Zach Moss is first. So, but it's close. So I think the ownership disparity is leading me to think Lindsay is the best of the contrarian running back plays.
All right. Hey, guys, hit that thumbs up if you haven't done so yet. maybe you stepped in late to the show. Well, we're happy to have you. And of course, subscribe. If you like what we do here, we're working. We're getting there. 50,000 subscribers. It's going to happen soon enough. And we got basketball coming up. Perfect time to tell you about that promo code Caruso. Get you a full all-access NBA all the way through the 29th of December. I'm dead serious. You heard that right. The next 10 days, including the first week of the regular season. So you get ownership projections, player projections, the boom bust tool, all of them created by Alex Baker, built by Alex Baker, used by him for his own lineups, the lineup builder, all of the amazing premium articles, and so much more for $1. You won't even notice it's gone. So if you've never checked out Awesemo before, you never tried it out, maybe you're suspicious of sites, you're just one of those people critical of everything. Well, you won't feel like you're burned here, even if you don't like it, because it's $1. You're going to like it. I know that. That's why we're doing it, because you're going to love what we have. But for $1, everything for NBA all the way through the next 10 days. Even if you sign up today, you still get those 10 days. So it's more than a week, and all of the first week for NBA. Use the promo code Caruso at checkout, CARUSO. Go to awesemo.com/join. Check it out today. Of course, if you have any questions, you can DM me at Laffy_D on Twitter. My DMs are begrudgingly open. Okay, Alex, what are you doing with Davante Adams? 30% target share since Lazard returned in Week 11. It's come down a little bit, but it's still at 30%, and he is the clear number one alpha on this team and probably in the league at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Davante Adams has been, he's kicked ass this year, like top fantasy option. If you take out those games he missed at the wide receiver position, I mean, there's nothing bad he can say about him other than he's just expensive. So I think he's the one I'm going to try to get in the lineups for sure. I mean, I think it is maybe closer with Diggs and him than the season numbers may look, but still, like, he's probably the hardest fade on the slate, Davante Adams.
Alex Caruso in this chat. It's got to be the real Caruso, right?
No doubt.
Got it.
Davante Adams is on. Oh, go ahead.
What'd you say?
No, I was just going to say Davante Adams is quite good.
Please continue.
That's all I got. No, I mean, they use them. We've seen it time and time again. When they're on the 1 yard line, they're the only team I can think of where you're most likely thinking, all right, it's Davante Adams time, not the running back. They are so eager to throw it to him. Extension of the run. If you play Rodgers, you have to play him. That's the one problem with him. He's so directly it's such a weird stack without him just because of how much he takes in this offense. But on a 2-game slate, I'll differentiate elsewhere. That's a pretty easy one for me.
Okay. Well, then what about, so let's say this, you get Davante Adams. You're saying if I'm playing Rodgers, I got to play Adams. There's no doubt about that. I'll give you a couple numbers here just so we get an idea of where the rest of this team is at. Robert Tonyan, 5 targets in each of his last 4 games. 1 touchdown in each of those games, and 1 red zone target in 3 of those 4. But his target share is only 15% because he has 5 targets. He hasn't gone above it. He hasn't gone below it. Lazard and Marquez Valdez-Scantling are both at 13%, and Aaron Jones is actually 4th with 9%. Do you like any other pass catchers that stand out or maybe are worth considering from this Green Bay side of the ball?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, you can do those peripheral guys. It's just you have to understand that they're playing, second or third or fourth fiddle in this offense. MVS is more of a boom bust guy, but he's got, absolutely he's got the talent, made a really nice touchdown grab in recent weeks. And we've seen him beat defenses over the top. Obviously, Jones has some catching ability. Tanyan's a red zone threat. Does start and end with Davante Adams, though, in this offense. He is always going to be the primary option, as we all know.
Alex, what do you think about some of these secondary, tertiary, maybe, options for the Green Bay Packers?
I think there's some good options. MVS has been running real hot with touchdowns, so I'm kind of thinking he'll be overowned. I think I like Lazard in comparison to MVS. In the past 2 weeks, MVS has played like a couple more snaps on Lazard, but it's been real close as Lazard works his way back from this injury. Lazard has been targeted more on routes this year, 16% to 13%. And Lazard's game log is really ugly, so I don't think people are going to play him. So that's kind of leading me to Lazard. The other guy I think you can play today that this might be like a little bit too deep for DFS, but Mercedes Lewis.
Ooh.
Oh boy.
So Jace Sternberger is on the COVID list. Last week, Lewis played about 1/3 of the snaps. So I think that if no tight end like gets above 7 points, which is somewhat likely, then Mercedes Lewis, if he catches a touchdown, can sneak in the optimal, and no one's going to be having him.
All right. Well, that's it, fellas. 2 up, 2 down, 1 hour flies by when you're having a good time like we are. Thanks to Jordan Klein for producing this show. Stick around. Greg and Jeff coming up next. We'll close it with this. Ben, your favorite, and a bit of a curveball here for you guys, but I trust that you can handle it. Favorite lower owned play that might allow you to differentiate. We talk so much about differentiation. We talk so much about, hey, you don't have to go crazy. Sometimes maybe it's just 1 or 2 things to do different. What would you say today is one way that you like to be different?
For me, it's the Bills running backs. I think that's the key to the slate. Although we know that it's very volatile, I think that there is a real opportunity for one of them to have a big time game, and that will change the entire slate.
How about you, Alex?
Kind of feeling Jerry Jeudy. I feel like he's kind of like the sharp play of the day because he's been doing terrible, but the underlying metrics suggest that he still has a good share of this Denver offense. So I think he'll be underowned today.
I love that. 3,900, just a team that we've seen when they fall behind, they will throw. Yeah, I'm also, if this game stays competitive, I don't know if it will, but we've seen so many games stay close when they're not expected to. Melvin Gordon has been the better running back, and it feels like it's only like with Cam Akers and with J.K. It's only a matter of time before they say, you know what, let's just give this guy the bulk of the carries because he's actually doing good things while Phillip Lindsay is just kind of getting carries and going nowhere. That'll do it for us, guys. Thanks again. Remember, hit that thumbs up, subscribe, and, we'll see you again. I was going to say happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and all that great stuff, but all three of us will be back here with you tomorrow, but stick around because Jeff and Greg are taking you up to lock for this Saturday 2-game slate. Good luck today.
Thanks, guys.
Later.
Welcome back.
I never left.
Jeff was in the waiting room the entire time. Sounds good. Yep. It's the Awesemo NFL Live Before Lock show. Once again, I'm joined by Geoff Ulrich. A little different this time. Instead of talking about Sunday's games, we're talking about the Saturday slate that's coming up. Today's show is sponsored by No House Advantage. Guys, don't forget, subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast network as well. So starting with our sponsor, No House Advantage, Jeff. If you aren't aware, No House Advantage combines DFS with prop bets to create a new user experience. So a couple of things here I just want to hit on with our sponsor here, a couple of No House Advantage props. I want to get your opinion on them. First, starting with Josh Allen on this slate, he is under 275.5 passing yards. With that number, which way do you lean?
Yeah, I'd lean over. The Bills just turned into a pass-first offense, man. I mean, I know with Denver, they got a little bit of a pass rush. It's, whatever, but I just do not ever want to take an under on a Josh Allen passing prop this year. They don't really have a run game outside of Josh Allen running the ball. But I don't think that with the weapons that they have out there, Cole Beasley, the pace that they're playing at, I'll still take the over here. It's maybe not like the most ideal matchup, but I still feel like anything Josh Allen, kind of under 280, 290, I think you take the over at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, listen to these pass attempts, too, for Josh Allen in recent games.
Exactly.
And a lot of these aren't even competitive games. Against the Steelers last week, they won by 11 points, 43 pass attempts. Exactly. 10-point win over the 49ers, 40 pass attempts. A loss against Arizona, he still threw 49 passes in that game. And before that, there was a 10-point win over Seattle that they were ahead for a lot of that game, and he had 38 pass attempts in that game. So you look at the volume to what you mentioned about Josh Allen, and it kind of seems like even in games that are ahead, they're willing to let Josh Allen drop back back and throw the ball, upwards of 40 times. So with that in mind, I agree with you. I'm going to lean a little bit towards the over on that one as well. And now here's one other player that I wanted to mention in terms of his prop. And this is a pretty hefty total here on Davante Adams, who is going to be the most popular player on the slate in terms of DraftKings and FanDuel. His receptions prop on No House Advantage, 8.5. That is a big number. So do you like the over or the under there? I'm going to lean towards the under because there is so little wiggle room to get to the over on that big of a number.
I don't even remember ever seeing a reception prop that big. I'm sure we saw it on Michael Thomas last year, so I guess I shouldn't say that. But, outside of like Michael Thomas last year, that's insane. I don't know how you can take the over there. Like you said, there's no room for error. I mean, Aaron Rodgers starts to throw to Alan Lazard a couple times on a drive, and it's like, you got like one chance at the end of the game. So I'd lean under there too. I just wouldn't touch that prop probably as my best play, but I definitely lean under if I was going to play it.
Yeah, and I think the other concern there too is, the spread of that game, and we'll get right into that. We'll launch into the quarterbacks here, is, the Packers are favored by 8 points in that game. So I do wonder a little bit is what happens if the Packers get ahead, by 10 points or something like that late. How willing are they going to be to have Aaron Rodgers continue to throw the ball? Will they grind out the clock? And that's something that remains to be seen. So then we talk about these two top quarterbacks on the slate. We've got Aaron Rodgers and Josh Allen. A little earlier in the week when I broke this slate down, Josh Allen was actually projected for much more ownership than Aaron Rodgers, and that is no longer the case. We now have Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers nearly identical ownership on DraftKings. On FanDuel, Aaron Rodgers coming slightly ahead. With that in mind, who do you prefer as a pay-up option between Allen and Rodgers on this slate?
Yeah, look, this is exactly what I've been struggling with in the 3 hours since we came on. It's tight, man. I don't think there's that much between these two. I'm going to lean Josh Allen, and it's for this reason. It's not even really priced. Like, you can get up to Aaron Rodgers fairly easily. There's moves you can make. But again, we just talked about it. Buffalo just doesn't run the ball. Even when they're ahead, they don't run the ball anymore. It's a complete shift in philosophy. And when they do run the ball, it might just be with Josh Allen. So I feel like you're very secure there as far as whatever happens in this game. Like, Josh Allen is going to be a high volume either passer, or he's probably going to run the ball a little bit. So to me, I think that speaks to me a little bit better. And again, it's got nothing to do with not liking the spot for Aaron Rodgers. Carolina's pass defense has been terrible, man. Absolutely, like, atrocious. They just let Drew Lock go nuts. So it's not like it's not a massive spot for Rodgers, but there's probably more scenarios that come into play there, with Aaron Jones taking a bigger piece of the pie, with maybe the Jamal Williams again, like just running out the clock late or something like that. So I think there's more scenarios there where Rodgers just gets closed out to like an okay-ish game, and by okay-ish I mean like 24 points or something, which is what he does every week, it seems like. But to me, I think Allen has that, a little bit better upside for that reason. That's the way I'm looking at it. It's real tight between these two, though, for sure. And it does look like we do, the projections that I've been using this week too. But all of them have Allen just slightly ahead of Rodgers, which does make sense to me.
Yeah, and then one other thing to mention here is you look at like the running back position, where we have two guys that are great pay up options relative to the slate, and the other guys, it's just like a who's who of like it's just garbage. So I really want to try to save as much salary as possible. So when you consider that Josh Allen, we have projected to score more fantasy points than Aaron Rodgers on this slate. He also comes in at a cheaper price, and the ownership is about the same. So with that in mind, I find it pretty hard to get up to Aaron Rodgers in a lot of lineups. And I think that the salary savings that you get from Josh Allen, the 800 on FanDuel and the 600 on DraftKings, it's a big deal. It's very important to me on this slate. And that's why I think that Josh Allen is the better play. And then as we talk about some of the cheaper quarterbacks, I think there's also a case to be made here, because if you roster somebody on DraftKings like Teddy Bridgewater or Drew Lock, that kind of opens up the salary savings to be able to make lineups where you could roster Mike Davis, Aaron Jones, and Davante Adams all together. And that is something that isn't necessarily as needed on FanDuel. So I don't think that Bridgewater and Lock make for great FanDuel plays. But on DraftKings, I think they become a lot more viable. So between Bridgewater and Lock, which of them do you like, if either?
So I don't necessarily think you have to pay down there. I kind of get your point, though. Like, they're definitely more viable on DraftKings for sure. And it kind of depends how you're attacking the slate. The only reason I'd use one of these guys, and again, it's mostly because I really wanted to sort of game stack. Like, if I wanted to go heavy on the Green Bay Carolina game, obviously if I'm going to play like 2, maybe 3 Carolina dudes, skill players, you can correlate them with Teddy Bridgewater pretty easily. So, and it would go the same with Drew Lock, but there's no question for me, it would be Teddy over Drew Lock. Lock is just he's shown some upside against weaker defenses, but I like the way Buffalo actually played on defense last week against Pittsburgh. I think they're getting healthier. I just don't think this is going to be a spot where you see Drew Lock have that kind of upside that we did actually see from last week. Whereas with Bridgewater, he starts slow, but again, Green Bay has been more the kind of defense where their offense always puts them up by 17, and then they just play prevent for a whole half, and all of a sudden the other team scores like 17 points in the second half. So I think Bridgewater's in a better spot. I think he's also just the better play. I think his upside has shown to be more consistent. He's got better, more consistent weapons as well. And the matchup's better. So for me, definitely Bridgewater's in play. But like I said, I'm just not sure if it's necessary to do that. Although, again, depends what we're talking about. If we're talking about like 100 lineups or whatever, that's a different story. Obviously, you're going to get exposure to some of these cheap QBs. So.
All right. So I know people in the chat are calling for me to say it because I piled on with him a little bit the other day. I just don't think Drew Lock's any good. And I understand that he played very well last week, but there's a couple issues here. Number one is even if you roster Drew Lock, it is a headache to figure out which of his receivers you want to pair him with. Like, is it going to be Tim Patrick? Is it going to be Jerry Jeudy, Noah Fant? He spreads the ball out a lot, and he isn't all that effective of a passer. So that's something else that makes it really difficult. Like, you look at Lock last week. Yeah, great game. 21 of 27 passing, nearly 300 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. But still, I saw some people saying to me like, hey, is this going to be the Jerry Jeudy week? Jerry Jeudy still did nothing last week with Drew Lock racking up all those passing numbers. So it's hard for me to figure out who to stack him with, where Teddy Bridgewater has much better weapons around him. And Teddy Bridgewater is also just the better quarterback overall. I mean, if you look at the fantasy point production this year, Teddy Bridgewater is averaging almost 5 more fantasy points per game than Drew Lock. So I understand there is a little bit of a price discrepancy there, but I actually like Teddy Bridgewater quite a lot, at least on DraftKings. On FanDuel, my favorite overall quarterback on the slate is Josh Allen. On DraftKings, it's Teddy Bridgewater because I like the salary savings and that it allows me to get into lineups where I have both the stud running backs, where I have Stephon Diggs or Devontae Adams. And it's just really hard to trust some of those cheaper running backs. And then as far as the cheaper wide receivers go, like if you get 18, 19 fantasy points, something like that from Teddy Bridgewater, I think there's a pretty good chance he ends up on the optimal lineup just because of how many good guys there are to pay up for on this slate.
Yeah, it's a good point because if you're playing Teddy, you can obviously correlate him. Like instead of using like KJ Hamler, you can get up to, like you said, you can correlate him with one of his top wide receivers, like a DJ Moore. Instead, that's the savings we're talking about, right? So I think, again, it's a good point. And again, you're probably not going to play Teddy. Well, maybe you might, Greg. I mean, I don't think it's like a terrible play or anything, but like in a cash game, you're probably going to pay up for Josh Allen. But, again, I mean, if you're making correlated lineups and Greg makes a great point here because it doesn't even matter what we think of Drew Lock. It is so much easier to pair Teddy Bridgewater with his receivers. We know who's getting the ball. Denver is like a weekly game of like, whack-a-mole, man. I mean, it's KJ Hamler last week. Everyone's calling for Jerry Jeudy. Maybe this will be the week. But I like Noah Fant last week. He was ill. He's got a great matchup again. Like, these dudes are so inconsistent, and their floors all suck, too. That's the thing. Like, so I think it's really hard to pair Drew Lock. I think it's not worth it. Again, it doesn't even matter what you think of him. It's just, from a fantasy perspective, building with Teddy Bridgewater, to me, is better in so many different ways. You start from the matchup and then you go to just who to pair him with. Far better play. So I think that's a good point on Bridgewater for sure. I still think that, you can, I don't know. It's going to be interesting it's an interesting slate because Bridgewater does have some viability, but at the same time, like he's not exactly someone who airs it out either. So we'll see how that one works out. But I definitely like the play of using him over Lock for sure.
So full disclosure, just talk about it in single entry on DraftKings because I mean, in terms of like playing multiple entry, like, yeah, I'm going to have I have exposure to all the quarterbacks because there's only 4 guys to choose from on the slate. There's 2 games. But so in terms of single entry, I have Teddy Bridgewater as my quarterback on DraftKings, and I have Josh Allen as my quarterback on FanDuel. So take that information with what you will, just so in full disclosure, I could say who it is that I'm rostering in a situation where I was only making one lineup. If I was playing cash games, which I'm not for a 2-game slate, then I would have gone with Josh Allen as my quarterback on both slates. And in terms of backup quarterbacks, no exposure to any of them, which I think is something that people might also be excited to know about after what happened on Thursday Night Football.
You're not going to get any Brett Rippon exposure?
No Brett Rippon exposure. I think he scores just about as many points today as Marcus Mariota does, though. So that is something else out there. I do wonder if people are just going to randomly be like, I have to play backup quarterbacks now because Marcus Mariota was the captain play yesterday. There were people who were asking me questions about that the other day, but yeah, no backup quarterbacks for me. So transitioning now to the running back position, and this is where it gets really tough because, I mean, it's not necessarily even that I love Aaron Jones to play for this slate. I don't play Aaron Jones all that much really ever because it's really hard to predict his snap share, the touches. Sometimes we see Jamal Williams out-touch him. So I never have that much confidence in Aaron Jones. With that said, compare him to the other running back options on the slate. We've got Aaron Jones, we've got Mike Davis, and then we've got just everybody else. So let's start with Jones versus Davis. If you could only roster one of these guys, which one of them are you picking?
Probably Davis, just for the reasons you lined out. Jamal Williams getting involved. Devontae Adams is essentially almost, he is part of the run game for Green Bay. They just use him on so many different ways. Obviously, they use him down the field, but they use him on so many of those short routes that Aaron Rodgers is the best in the world at getting out because he gets the ball out so quickly that he eats into the run game a little bit as well. Devontae Adams does. So Jones's opportunities have really flatlined. And I mean, again, he's a running back getting 16 to 19 touches a game. It's not terrible. And he's certainly explosive enough that, if you fade him, it could blow up in your face, like on play one too. I mean, like it legitimately could be like a David Montgomery scenario from last week where it's like, oh my God, Aaron Jones just took the first snap, 80 yards. That's the type of player he is. But, Mike Davis is going to be in there. He's not coming off the field. He catches receptions. It's just a far more secure spot. So yeah, it kind of pains me to say it because I like Aaron Jones, but he's explosive. He's a far more explosive player. But the opportunity for Mike Davis is just better, and he's cheaper. So if I'm taking one, I'm probably taking Aaron Jones. It's also an easy pivot. Like if you're really like maybe you just want to do a lineup like 3,000 on the table, or you just you're just want to fade Aaron Jones. I mean, you're just roster Jamal Williams, right? So there's nothing like that with Mike Davis. You're either playing him or you're just fading that situation altogether. So.
Yeah, to me, I prefer Mike Davis to Aaron Jones. So the issue I have with Aaron Jones, like I said before, is just I'm never all that confident in his workload. There are games where we see Jamal Williams with about equal snaps, but ends up getting more touches. It's a very volatile and highly variant situation. Now, with that said, I think ideally, particularly in cash games, you want to get both Mike Davis and Aaron Jones in there because once you get below these guys anyway, you just have no clue what's going to happen. We've got Melvin Gordon, Devin Singletary, Jamal Williams, Zach Moss, Phillip Lindsay. These are the other options on the slate, and none of them really stand out. So I think that you want to have as much Aaron Jones and Mike Davis as possible. But if you are in a situation we can only roster one, I'm going to lean towards Mike Davis. I'm more confident in his workload. I like the matchup better for him. And I think there's also a better chance of him getting passing game work. If we look at Aaron Jones going up against the Panthers, the Packers are probably going to be leading in that game and running the ball out late, where Mike Davis is going to be in a passing game role, most likely in the fourth quarter. And you look at his targets at the apex when the Panthers have needed to throw the ball, he's gotten 10 targets in a game against the Falcons. We saw him a game with 9 targets early in the season, back-to-back games with 6 targets. So there's a lot of passing game security with Mike Davis. And in a game where we expect the Panthers are going to be trailing to the Packers, I think we could probably chalk up Mike Davis for 6 to 8 targets or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's the point we're both kind of trying to make here. I mean, it's just, it doesn't even matter what the game flow is. Like if Carolina somehow gets ahead, I mean, they'll probably still throw the ball short and give Mike Davis handoffs, right? So very secure in that sense. I think you'd almost prefer Carolina to be behind. So maybe you could get exposure to one of those like 10 target games for him. We also have Curtis Samuel a little bit banged up. He's been taking some carries in the red zone. If he does miss, or if he's just not 100%, like doesn't see as much field, I mean, that's only going to bump up Mike Davis. So actually, when we start to talk about this more, it only just makes me more secure that like he's like easily the number one player at RB on this slate. Now, that being said, like you still want to play Aaron Jones, right, Greg? Because like who you said, who else are you going to play? I mean,
yeah. I didn't mean 100% in terms of I'm playing him 100%, but yeah, definitely he's a fine play relative to the other options. If I'm ranking the running backs on the slate, it's going to be Mike Davis 1. It's going to be Aaron Jones 2. It's just really hard to trust any of these cheaper running backs. So that's one of the other reasons also that I said on DraftKings, I like rostering Teddy Bridgewater because he gives you the salary flexibility to be able to roster both of the expensive running backs with Devontae Adams, whereas it's really hard to do that if you're rostering Aaron Rodgers or Josh Allen on this slate. So talking about these cheaper running backs, do you have confidence in any of them or any of them that really stand out to you as a good play? I mean, one thing that really catches my eye, Devin Singletary, almost 40% owned by the field. People love Devin Singletary in this spot on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he's a little bit more, not necessarily appropriately owned. I still think 25% is too high, but it's not nearly the almost 40% he is on DraftKings. So any of these cheap running backs, if you had to roster one, which do you think stands out as the best play?
Yeah, I honestly don't get the Singletary thing at all. I like Devin Singletary too. I think he's a good player. Like I kind of wish Buffalo would use him more, but like he's not even getting the red zone touches. Like Zach Moss has pretty much come in as more of the power back role, right? So maybe this is the game where he just like breaks free and he ends up with like a 7-yard carry or something, 7 yards per carry, and they just ride him. It could happen for sure. Denver hasn't been that great against the run. So I think maybe that's what's leading people towards this call. But like I said, like you have a rushing quarterback here too, Josh Allen. So Singletary kind of just getting shut out from that kind of work. And I mean, he's had low touchdown totals in his career at Buffalo, excuse me. Denver's not really in a spot with their offense to necessarily make this like a close game or an exciting game. It could happen again, but there's a lower probability of it. So I don't know. I just don't see it. I think I'd rather use Zach Moss. I mean, he's like a third of the ownership. We've seen Zach Moss have like 2 touchdown games, right? If he does come in and just converts a couple red zone carries, I mean, you're laughing, right? So I'm not even sure if that's the running back I would go to. I think it's really close. I think Moss is definitely in play. I think it's between him and Jamal Williams, though. I don't mind the 2 RB plays on these two game slates. Jamal Williams is also like a really good receiver. So I think I would probably lean Williams over Moss because again, with the rushing QB, I just don't really like the Buffalo RBs that much. I almost didn't think we would have to talk about them this much, but you're right. With the ownership up to Singletary, like we kind of have to touch on it. I think I would rather use Jamal Williams with Aaron Jones than touch the Buffalo running back situation. I just think it's too volatile.
Yeah, I don't necessarily love either of them, but with that said, if I had to roster one, it would be Zach Moss, just because of the difference in ownership. When you have Zach Moss projected for 13% ownership and then Devin Singletary projected for 37% ownership, with that big of a gap between them, I don't think that one of them is that much more likely to outscore the other. So with that in mind, that's why I think that Moss makes a little bit more sense just compared to the ownership. But if I have to roster one of these running backs who isn't Aaron Jones or Mike Davis, I'm going to Melvin Gordon. Both him and Phillip Lindsay did come into the list as questionable, but they're both going to be active. But I mean, still, you look at the workload that Melvin Gordon's played in recent weeks, pretty consistently getting around 15 touches in the run game, and then he's getting 2 or 3 targets also. I think that's okay workload for him overall, and I at least feel more confident in him playing a sizable role than I do in Devin Singletary, Jamal Williams, Zach Moss, or Phillip Lindsay, who's unfortunately just not been involved in the passing game at all this year. So if I'm rostering a running back who isn't Aaron Jones or Mike Davis, Melvin Gordon is the one that I feel the most confident in.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't really like Melvin Gordon just as a player, so I'm always a little bit biased against him. But I did kind of, when I first did the first look at the slate, I mean, Buffalo hasn't been that good against the run, although they were actually a lot better against Pittsburgh. And they do have Milano back, but Gordon's workload has been really secure. So you kind of got to give him a little bit of credit for that. I think for me, I would rather try and get up to one of the receivers, like in the flex. Like if you're starting, we're being theoretical here. You start with Jones and Davis. You just eat that chalk, which I actually think is fine on this slate. We saw I think the last time we had a 2-game slate, I think it was Raheem Mostert was like 70% owned, scored 6 points, was still in the winning lineup. So I think just getting those 2 lead backs from Green Bay, Carolina is fine. My thing is like, you're gonna play Melvin Gordon over like DJ Moore. Like I think the upside's better with DJ Moore. So that's kind of my take on Gordon. Like, are you going to fade Jones or Davis and use him, or are you going to use him in the flex? I think he's okay in the flex, but he wouldn't be my top choice there. He's definitely in the conversation, but I don't know. I just don't really trust anyone from Denver. So my take on the Denver offense is you play the cheap guys. Like, you play like a KJ Hamler. Maybe you take a shot with like a double tight end lineup with Fant. Or you take a shot with Judy. I think Judy's banged up, so I'm probably also it looks like Tre'Davious White will be on him. So I probably prefer Hamler or Fant as a cheap Denver option rather than paying up for Gordon. But I 100% see where you're coming from. The workload's been pretty steady, and realistically, if Denver's going to make a game of this, there's a good chance Gordon will be involved. So.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the priority is still to roster Aaron Jones and Mike Davis, but if you're rostering one of the expensive quarterbacks, chances are you might not be able to roster both of them. So that's why I have Melvin Gordon as the next guy that I would get to. And then if you're getting to some of the cheaper running backs, I mean, if you're going to fade Aaron Jones in a lineup, then I think that's where Jamal Williams would make a little bit more sense. Because if Aaron Jones doesn't play well, chances are it's probably because Jamal Williams got more of the touches and carries. So I don't know that I'd want to roster Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams together. I actually definitely wouldn't want to, but I think that there is sense to making a rule in Fantasy Cruncher that, hey, I want to have, a certain amount of exposure to Jamal Williams, but set a rule that you don't have Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams in lineups together. And then I think you set yourself up with a nice little leverage situation where Aaron Jones coming in at 65% ownership compared to 14% ownership for Jamal Williams, because that is the number one way that Aaron Jones fails. It's just that Jamal Williams ends up being the guy for Green Bay. I mean, what are the other ways he fails? It's Devontae Adams has a big game and he scores, 3 touchdowns from the 1 yard line because they use him as basically like a goal line back by throwing 1 yard passes to him. But that's probably it. Like, I think we both think the Packers are going to put points on the board. So Aaron Jones fails. I think those are the two routes, right? It's Jamal Williams ends up being the guy, or short touchdown passes to Devontae Adams. So I'll say that if you don't have Aaron Jones in a lineup, you certainly want to have Jamal Williams and or Devontae Adams in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree 100%. So, and of those, of those two, I mean, I would definitely not shy away from playing both of them together. So yeah, Devontae Adams to me is just, you just play him, right? Like, you get him in there, and you can think about playing him with Diggs or whatever. But for me, he's the play over Diggs. This is a situation with Diggs too, where he gets the ball a lot, but he's not necessarily in the same situation as Devontae Adams, just in terms of how consistent and his wide usage. He's going to get targets, obviously, but there are situations in games where, Buffalo will throw more to Cole Beasley and stuff like that. So Devontae Adams is like the main guy from Green Bay, since we're on the subject, that I would start around. And then you either mix in like Williams or Jones. And like you said, like Greg said, if Jones fails, it's because of one of the two guys that you have in your lineup. So
talking about some of those expensive wide receivers, you mentioned Devontae Adams and definitely wanting to roster him. I agree with you. I think you're paying up for one guy on the slate. If you could only have one of Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Aaron Jones, and Mike Davis, to me, it would be Devontae Adams as the guy. Obviously, it's not really the situation. In general, I think we could fit 2 or 3 of them into every lineup. But to me, Devontae Adams is the one that's the highest priority. I know I talked about this slate the other day and talking about with Devontae Adams nearly 70% owned. Would I want to be over or underweight to the field with him if I was playing multi-entry? And to me, I want to be at least even with the field and maybe even a little bit over on Devontae Adams. I think that he's a guy who is playing so well and gets so much work in the red zone. I mean, you look at he scored a touchdown at least 8 games in a row now. Like, there is no player, a skill position player in the NFL with more touchdown equity than Devontae Adams right now. So with that in mind, I think Devontae Adams, even with the ownership, it's hard to get away from him because he basically scores a touchdown every single game. And on a 2-game slate, if he scores, chances are he's in the optimal lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, and you're talking about strategy and stuff like that. I mean, and both these guys, just as I switch over here to the wide receiver position, but both Diggs and Adams are pretty up there in ownership, right? So you're not getting if you're going to try and get fans back, I'm going to play Diggs instead of Devontae Adams. That's fine, but you're really not gaining like a ton of leverage here. I don't think. I think people are pretty good at finding ways to fit in like both wide receivers and stuff like that. And the other thing is, like, you also have a situation here where on these 2-game slates, like people sometimes tend to overthink this and just be like, oh, this is a good, I'll be sneaky and like use Diggs over Adams. So Adams might not even come in as owned as he should be. So to me, like strategy wise, there's just nothing that really points to Davante Adams being like a spot. So you just kind of eat that and you find other spaces. Like I said, I think Diggs makes more sense as someone to fade because we've seen Cole Beasley like be the main target there. We've seen even like Gabriel Davis be involved. Josh Allen can move the ball with his legs. We've never seen anyone like be the Davante Adams for Green Bay except Davante Adams, right? So I start there. And then I move down at wide receiver.
Yeah, I agree with you on Diggs. If I had to fade one of the expensive players on the slate, let's say that we could only roster 3 of the 4, Diggs is the one that gets left out for me. And you look at Diggs also, he's coming off a great game. He scored 30 fantasy points last week. It was the first time all year that he scored over 30 fantasy points on DraftKings. Meanwhile, Cole Beasley's gone over the mark in 2 of his last 4 games. So Cole Beasley's a guy with plenty of upside. I actually think that per dollar, he is the best wide receiver play to me on this slate. Cole Beasley, 4,700 on DraftKings and 5,800 on FanDuel. Meanwhile, 38% owned on FanDuel and 40% owned on DraftKings. This being a 2-game slate and relative to the price, I actually think that Cole Beasley's under-owned at that kind of ownership because I think he makes for that good of a value play because I don't think there's anybody else who's priced, under the 5,000 mark that's anywhere close to the value that Cole Beasley is. And we're really hurting for cheap plays on the slate. So to me, Cole Beasley is the guy that makes for the best play on the slate as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. I pretty much agree with you. I think the spot too, we're talking about matchups. I mean, Denver's secondary, it's been pretty solid against, big wide receivers like Diggs. Like they've only allowed a couple 100-yard receivers this year. Whereas you look at their slot coverage, it hasn't been as good. So, allowing guys like Jameson Crowder to get open and stuff like that. Scotty Miller had a decent game. So I think the matchup also points to where, again, Buffalo has done that with their receivers, right? They've rotated Josh Allen's usage a bit to different receivers. It hasn't just been like a Diggs-centric thing where, it's just been Diggs, and then sometimes the other guys will eat. It has been moved around a bit. Nothing against Diggs. He can still go off. He's good enough to do it, right? But I think that's definitely how I'm looking at the top 2 receivers. I agree with you on Beasley, probably the best pure value. I think where it gets interesting is where when we start to talk about the other cheap receivers in that game. Obviously, Denver has a lot, but like Gabriel Davis and maybe even Dawson Knox are in play here too for Buffalo. If I'm double stacking Josh Allen, I'm definitely going to look at one of those 2 guys.
Yeah, and then one other thing, I would be remiss if I did not mention, guys, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel because this is true. If you guys don't subscribe, my apologies, I have to listen to the Christmas theme intro music on loop for 8 hours straight. If I don't get X amount of subscribers during the show, I have to listen to Christmas music on repeat. So do me a favor, don't make me do that. Jordan right there, he's smiling in the background because he's all excited for me to have to listen to Mariah Carey and other Christmas music on repeat if, guys, you don't go subscribe to the channel. So go do that. And one other thing also is that we are offering a special deal here for $1 if you use the promo code Caruso. For all new customers, you get access to our NBA package for the first week of the season. So through December 29th, you get access for $1 using the promo code Caruso. This includes projections, ownership projections, expert Slack chat, our lineup builder, and everything else that the website offers. So that's only $1, nothing to lose. Check that out if you're trying to dip your toes into NBA DFS. So the other thing to talk about here with these wide receivers, Curtis Samuel is currently questionable to play. What are your feelings on him, whether he's going to be in or out, and how are you just handling the situation as a whole?
So, yeah, I think this is probably like the biggest news on the slate because we got confirmation of like Gordon's playing. It's a hamstring. He went through the practice. It looks like it was a bit of a surprise appearance, and he's kind of been questionable before. So I don't know. This could drive his ownership down. Like there's 2 ways to look at it, right? It drives his ownership down and you take advantage and you just play him, or you just say, okay, well, he's banged up. He's questionable. I'm just going to play DJ Moore. He's $4,000. He's $400, more expensive. It's really easy to get up to him. And, again, if you're on Awesemo, you'd have exposure to our awesome, wide receiver projections, you'd know like Curtis Samuel's up there in projections at 26, but DJ Moore is actually projected to be more owned at 40%. So I think you could even see that Samuel number dip lower than that with the questionable news. I know late swap is in play and stuff like that, but a lot of people won't use it either, right? So I think trying to get Curtis Samuel in your lineups, because again, it doesn't sound like that big a deal to me. It is actually a play I'm interested in. That's probably going to be something I do here. Wait up till news, put the open spot in my flex and get Samuel in if everything looks good.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because right now we have Curtis Samuel projected for 27% ownership on DraftKings and coming in at 22% on FanDuel. But with that said, we're 26 minutes to lock and he's still listed as questionable. If I know how the field usually reacts to these situations, if we don't get news on him anytime soon, people just aren't going to roster him. Yep. So with that in mind, I think that he makes for actually what's going to probably be a really good low-owned play because I just don't think people are going to want to go into a 2-game slate and roster a guy who's questionable after the first game because we know that people generally don't like to use late swap. So I think that Curtis Samuel is somebody who's probably going to make for a really good low-owned play in GPPs. So I'm on board with you. I like Curtis Samuel. Then I also think we have to discuss what happens if Curtis Samuel sits. If we get news that he's not playing, who is the value play that you think stands out?
So are we talking just from Carolina or just in general?
Yeah, Carolina. So if Curtis Samuel is out, which wide receiver do you think it is that steps up? I'll start by saying I think the guy is going to be Pharoh Cooper. So Cooper, who's also the stone cold min price. Last week, he was targeted 3 times, caught 3 passes, 52 yards. He's the guy who I think would end up starting or at least playing a lot of those Curtis Samuel snaps. But with that said, that's only under the assumption that Samuel sits. If Samuel plays, then there's no reason at all to roster Pharoh Cooper. But Pharoh Cooper is a guy who's probably going to be 1-2% owned at min price. That's a guy I would be interested in if Curtis Samuel ends up not playing.
Yeah, and look, realistically, the only other name I could even bring up in this conversation is Ian Thomas, right? Maybe Ian Thomas ends up getting a little bit more love, but quite frankly, we've been waiting for the Ian Thomas breakout all year. It's not happening. So Pharoh Cooper, to me, would actually be like the play there if you didn't want to eat the DJ Moore chalk. If you didn't want to just pivot up or leave yourself enough salary, it would definitely be Pharoh Cooper. And this is another reason actually you can play it. If things are looking bleak after game 1, you can pivot to the 1% owned play in Pharoh Cooper, right? And if they're not, maybe you just take DJ Moore and be like, okay, I'm just riding like my good plays from the first game. So there's lots of different reasons to make this play or to leave it open with the Pharoh Cooper possible move swerve. And again, we're just going through obviously the slate. Like realistically, Lazard is there as like another pivot on Green Bay. I don't think he's going to be projected with much ownership. Pretty sure he's actually lower than Valdez-Scantling. Yeah, so like Lazard is projected for lower ownership in that game as well. He's cheaper than Curtis Samuel. I think that would be the other play you could move to, but that one kind of depends more on what the structure of your lineup is. You may not want to add another Green Bay wide receiver, whereas Cooper is just, obviously you're adding a Carolina wide receiver,
So you hit on something there that I think is a very good talking point for a 2-game slate, and that is about making pivots when you have lineups that are sitting dead after the first game, because that's something I'll do a lot of to try to capture some min cashes if I have lineups that are sitting dead. If I'm going to play a bunch of lineups, and there's a good chance that after the early game, a handful of those lineups are going to be sitting dead. And the way I want to approach that to try to get a little more EV into those lineups is, let's say that after the first game, I have a lineup that just all the players in it sucked. And then we have for the later game, let's say I have, Devontae Adams in the lineup or something like that. I'll make a point to try to pivot off of some of those high-owned guys to lower-owned plays, just because if those high-end plays go off, that lineup is still dead anyway. But the only chance you have to maybe capture a min cash with some of those lineups that look dead is you pivot off some of those higher-owned plays and go to lower-owned plays and hope that either the lower-owned guy goes off or the higher-owned play duds, because that's a situation where you could get a lineup from being dead to, at least having a chance to getting some money back. So I think that was also a good point by you. A couple other wide receiver situations to compare here. I know we've talked about it being tough. For some reason, people are always asking us about Jerry Jeudy in the chat. Overall, these Denver receivers, which of them do you like the most, if any?
Yeah, no, we should touch on them because one of them will probably have a good game. Again, it is kind of a shell game, though, guys. Like, I don't know how anyone could be confident on Jerry Jeudy at this point. And let me go off the reason why I was interested in him, because he is projecting with really low ownership. So I think the only reason I would play Jerry Jeudy is for the ownership projections. And admittedly, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good situation just from, again, and I'll give you guys it since, hit the like button for me though, before I give you the Jerry Jeudy ownership project. How's that? Get those likes up, subscribe. Then I'm going to hit you with the Jerry Jeudy ownership projection. So everyone done it? Good. Okay. So Jerry Jeudy, 3,900, 5.8%, projected ownership on him. That's actually nearly half of Hamler. It's also, it's quite a bit lower than Tim Patrick as well. So, that's a solid reason in and of itself to take a shot with him. Now, the reason I don't want to play him, there's a lot more reasons. Probably going to have Tre'Davious White on him here. That's the matchup that it looks like he's going to get the most. He's been dealing with ankle injuries for it seems like forever this year. And quite frankly, I think that's holding him back a little bit. If that's not holding him back, then the other thing is him and Drew Lock, one of them are just too bad to make this connection work. Maybe, I don't actually think it's Jeudy, but something with the Drew Lock, Jerry Jeudy connection is not clicking, right? So maybe against Buffalo, this is where it clicks. But realistically, the only reason I want exposure to Jeudy in the slate is low ownership. I would rather go up to Hamler, take a little bit more ownership. Again, he's 3,500. He's easier to fit in. And realistically, I said this at the start about the Denver guys. I just want one big play, and I want the cheapest guys. And Hamler offers both of the best of both of those worlds. He'll probably be getting the off cornerback as well. He's not going to get the top corner. I kind of like going to KJ Hamler here.
Yeah, I find it really tough to be confident in any of these guys. I know somebody earlier in the chat was saying, well, Tim Patrick, he's always safe. I mean, he scored touchdowns in recent games, except still, you look at his target share against the Saints 3 weeks ago, he had scored 0 fantasy points on 2 targets. Then against the Chiefs, he caught 4 of 4 targets for 44 yards and 2 touchdowns. So that game ends up looking good. And then last week, he was targeted 5 times, caught 3 of them for 36 yards and a touchdown. So I understand that people are looking at the last 2 games for Tim Patrick and be like, look at the fantasy point totals. He's safe. It's like, yeah, he's getting targeted 4 times per game by Drew Lock. And a couple of them happen to have gone for touchdowns. So it makes his fantasy point total look safe. But I don't necessarily trust a guy who's getting, 4 targets a game from Drew Lock to necessarily have a great game. The target that I think makes the most sense from the Denver side of the game is going to be Noah Fant. And we can talk about him when we get to the tight end position. But I look at these wide receivers. I can't view any of them as any more than dart throws. I don't want to make a significant investment in Tim Patrick, Jerry Jeudy, or KJ Hamler. If you want to throw them into a lineup to fill salary with, or that's the last spot on your roster, that's fine. But I don't want to make, 20, 50 lineups or something like that and being like, I'm going 30% Jerry Jeudy and taking a big stand. To me, these guys are nothing more than dart throws. I have 0 confidence in any of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't really agree more. There's just better plays, right? It's probably better to try and get up to Samuel or something like that, or Beasley, and then make lineups like that, or maybe even go with Teddy Bridgewater. Hamler could go off, but the floors for these Denver wide receivers are terrible. They are absolutely mind-numbingly terrible. So definitely not a spot that I would want to go super crazy overweight on. Realistically, Hamler would be the one I'd pick out. And again, you're going to be making some game stacks. So obviously when you're making a ton of lineups in your NME lineups, you're going to get exposure to these guys. I would personally rank them. Hamler would be the guy I'd be a little bit overweight on. Again, his ownership isn't crazy. Might get a little bit of exposure to Jeudy. And then Noah Fant would be the other guy I'd consider. But I really do like the 2 tight end play on this slate. I will say that. We'll get to tight ends, obviously, when we get to them. But Fant would be in play for me for that reason.
Yeah, and then I think the other cheap wide receiver situation to compare, we have Allen Lazard versus Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Personally, I prefer MVS for the upside. I've really liked MVS when we had the initial ownership projections earlier in the week, and he was only projecting for 4% ownership. That's come up a little bit at 16%. But even so, we look at Allen Lazard, who missed a big chunk of the season with a core injury. And since coming back, the Packers have been really cautious with him. So the last few weeks, 3 targets, 4 targets, 6 targets, 4 targets. He's not playing nearly as many snaps as he played earlier in the week. So with that said, we basically have MVS playing as the number 2 wide receiver on the Packers, and he is wildly inconsistent. But you talk about the upside. If you're looking for upside in a cheap wide receiver on a 2-game slate, Valdez-Scantling has that. I certainly think that he's a higher upside play than guys like Tim Patrick or Jerry Jeudy or KJ Hamler, any of these other cheap wide receivers people are talking about. I mean, MVS, number one, he's Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball. But then number two, I mean, look at last week, 85 yards and a touchdown. Then you go back to week 10 against Jacksonville, 149 yards and a touchdown, 2 touchdowns the week before. So he has legitimate upside, and he has Aaron Rodgers throwing him the football. So if I'm going to roster one cheap wide receiver, it's MVS to me. And it's not like he's all that popular either. He's 16% with the chance to break the slate. So he's the guy that I'm really hitching my wagon to.
Yeah, fair enough. I think him and Hamler are similar plays. Again, the home run plays, right? So Hamler is a lot cheaper. That's obviously the one thing he has going for him. Obviously, MVS has more going for him with Aaron Rodgers. So, and MVS's ownership is up there, but it's not crazy. I like Allen Lazard is a better player than MVS. There's a reason why he's the wide receiver 2 there. He's been banged up this year, though, and it really hasn't happened much for him lately. I kind of wonder if maybe this is the game where he pops up again, but it is kind of tough to take Lazard over MVS, even with Lazard getting lower ownership projections. I would have trouble doing that right here, and it kind of hurts me because, like I said, I think Lazard is a far better wide receiver, but MVS works well as wide receiver 3 as a deep guy, and for a one-game slate, again, where you're looking for that big point outburst, I think MVS is probably in a better spot to give you like the better ceiling for the price and stuff like that. So no disagreement there. Obviously he's got a better chance of hitting it than Hamler, but I think for me, MVS, Hamler, one of those guys has a big play. They'll obviously be there, and they're both kind of in place. So those would be the guys I'd be targeting for those cheap ones as well.
Yeah, and then I think the other thing too is I would feel different about Lazard if he was playing the snaps he was playing earlier in the year. But this is a situation just like what we talk about with basketball. If a guy's playing, 18 minutes, it's really hard to bank on something like that having a big game because there's just limited opportunities. And the Packers, they're a team that's basically locked into the playoffs at this point. They have one of the best records in the NFL. Aaron Rodgers in the MVP conversation. And Allen Lazard, like you said, he really is the second best wide receiver on the team. But with that said, they know they're going to be in the playoffs. They're probably getting a first-round bye. So there's no reason to push him at this point in the season and have him play, 70 or 80% of the snaps. If we were to find out there's no restrictions on Lazard, then I would change my mind. But we're 14 minutes before lock, and he's been restricted for the last month. So it's hard for me to think anything else is going to happen unless we were to see it or if something material were to change. Because as of right now, I just don't see it. I lean towards MVS over Lazard. Are there any wide receivers we didn't mention that you think warrant ownership?
No, actually, that's a good question. I don't think so. I think we touched on pretty much everyone. Yeah, the Green Bay one was actually the one, the last one really that we needed to touch on. And I think it's good points about Lazard. You also have Tonyan involved in the red zone, kind of taking some of those targets and usage away from Lazard. So again, I like him, but MVS is definitely, to me, the superior play. We mentioned the Pharaoh Cooper possible switch. Equinemius St. Brown getting a little bit of work. That's probably too thin. Again, we got like 5 guys here on Green Bay. He is popping up, but don't even just forget I said that. Pharaoh Brown would be the cheap guy if you're going to make a pivot for sure. That all depends on Samuel though.
And then in terms of the other Panthers wide receivers, do you have a lean towards Robbie Anderson or DJ Moore as the better guy to pay up for? I think both of them are pretty neutral plays. Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, both coming in around 40%. They would benefit a little bit if Curtis Samuel was to be ruled out, but neither of them project super highly. I think that Cole Beasley is the better play for a cheaper price than both of them. So Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, 40% ownership. I don't have a strong take for or against them. They're not guys that I think warrant have much more or less exposure to than the field has.
Yeah, and a lot of it depends on matchup. Like right now, I mean, PFF has Jari Alexander going against Robbie Anderson a little bit more. And I think you could see that Robbie Anderson a little bit more of the sort of de facto number one. I like the upside for DJ Moore. I think you save price. I think you go with DJ Moore, quite frankly. I do prefer that play a little bit better. Even if, and realistically, like if we do get that situation, I think DJ Moore is more capable of beating a top corner anyways than Robbie Anderson is kind of like consistently. So I just take the cheaper guy there. I kind of like DJ Moore a slightly better, but both of them are in play for sure. And again, just lastly on this on the wide receivers, I believe we're getting like almost equal ownership. So just take the cheap guy really.
And the other thing to mention too, just because he's still getting brought up, Curtis Samuel, as of now, still listed as questionable. I tend to think he's probably more likely to play than sit, but I don't know that for sure. That's just a guess. That's what we have right now is information on him. He's questionable to play. The other thing too is, that game doesn't start for 4 hours. So there's not necessarily a rush for the team to get out information on Curtis Samuel. So just something to wait and see. If you're going to roster him, I'd certainly play him in the flex spot, so you give yourself the most potential ability to swap off of him. But for right now, we're not totally sure if he's in or out. Moving to the tight end position, something I mentioned before, I think the guy that you want to roster as a pass catcher from the Broncos is going to be Noah Fant. I think he's the most talented of the tight ends on the slate. The other thing also, he is not nearly as highly owned as Robert Tonyan. We currently have Tonyan projected for over 60% ownership. He's been very consistent over the last 4 weeks, scored touchdowns in all of those games. But Noah Fant at a third of the ownership of Robert Tonyan, I don't necessarily think that Tonyan is 3 times more likely to end up in the optimal lineup than Fant. We also have Fant projected for more fantasy points than Tonyan at a cheaper price. So all that considered, I think that Fant makes for the overall best tight end play on the slate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about overall best, but I definitely agree from the ownership perspective, right? Because I do think it's a really good spot for Robert Tonyan, and it kind of hurts me to see him this chalky because he's almost an auto fade. Because I do think Fant is in a good spot too, and I think that all things considered, at 1/3 the ownership, it's kind of a no brainer, regardless of even if Tonyan's not projecting out to be that much better than Noah Fant for me, that I'm going to just fade him. I think Fant and Dawson Knox are both really good plays. And again, both make for good pivots off of Tonyan. I mean, Dawson Knox getting more involved is a big red zone target. Again, if you're on the idea like I am that maybe Steph Diggs is the big wide receiver to fade, Knox is like a good red zone target. He's a good kind of pivot to there. So, if you're playing Josh Allen, maybe use Beasley, but maybe use Dawson Knox too. That's kind of the way I'm looking at Josh Allen lineups anyways. Tonyan to me is in a really good spot. Wouldn't shock me if he had a multi-touchdown game, but he's going to be 65% owned or 60% owned. Yeah, I'll pivot to Fant. I mean, they should be passing more. It's a really good matchup against Buffalo, who allows a ton of receptions there. At some game, I've always felt at some point, Fant is going to go off this year. He's had injury issues, but he's very talented, and he gets a decent target share when he's on the field. I know he burned everyone last week, including me, but that was just a random. What are you going to do about it? He was sick during the game. I mean, he's practiced all week. You can't. I mean, if anything, just take advantage of it now because it's obviously going to keep a few disgruntled people off him here. So. Yeah,
I mean, we're already seeing it in the chat where somebody's like, "Is Fant going to do the same thing again as last week?" Maybe right, exactly. He does. He does seem to leave a lot of games early, but it's not something. It's not something I'm making. It's not something I'm making projections and have some Anthony Davis type of coefficient where it's this guy is expert.
We haven't hit the money burning Geoff for Noah Fant yet. Maybe if he doesn't again this week, we might, but we haven't hit that point yet, guys. So.
But it's one of those things, players get hurt so often in the middle of games in football. It's going to happen to somebody probably on the slate. There's probably going to be at least one high-owned player. The last 2 game slate we saw, right? Antonio Gibson was the 3rd highest owned player. He plays 1 series and leaves the game with an injury. So yeah, it's probably going to happen to somebody. Could it be Noah Fant? Maybe. It's something that's so hard to predict in football, though. It's players get injured. It's part of the game. One player who I want to touch on a little bit here is Ian Thomas at 2,500. Because if Curtis Samuel is ruled out, I mean, Thomas is a guy, he had 4 targets last week. He's 2,500 on DraftKings. I don't really think we have to roster him on FanDuel at 4,500 just because some of those other tight ends like Dawson Knox and Nick Vannett and even Noah Fant himself are really cheap. But on DraftKings specifically, Ian Thomas at 2,500, if you really need to save salary, projected at less than 10% ownership. And in particular, if we end up getting a situation where Curtis Samuel doesn't play, I think Ian Thomas could pick up some of those targets. Nobody's really on him, and tight end's already a tough enough position to fill that. There's a chance that Tonyan and Fant both suck anyway, and all the tight ends are bad, and you just want the guy who's the cheapest anyway. So Ian Thomas, I think, warrants more exposure than the field's giving him.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, again, I feel like at the same time, he's like a hard 4 for me in tight end. So if I can, I'm definitely going to get up to Dawson Knox there, but I guess there's maybe not that big a difference between those two, assuming Samuel is out. Again, I wouldn't want to play him if Samuel's in there. I just feel like it's too many mouths to feed there. But yeah, he's definitely number 4. If you're absolutely in deathly need of a min-price guy, I mean, realistically, you go for the Mercedes Lewis touchdown. I would rather go with Ian Thomas. There's a better chance you might get like a 450 in a touchdown game. Probably not going to get that from Lewis. Lewis, you're just looking for the touchdown. So yeah, I agree. Like Ian Thomas is the play at the mid price. Not a player that even if Samuel's out, I don't know if I'd stretch it there, but I can kind of see your point. Yeah, for sure. He did get targeted 4 times last game. He's just been so not a part of the offense for Carolina there that I have a hard time believing like that even with Samuel that it's going to happen, but hey, maybe it does.
Yeah. And I think the case for rostering Ian Thomas has less to do with how well he'll play and more to do with what if all the tight ends are bad and then you just have the cheapest tight end anyway, who gets hey, 2 catches for 24 yards, but all the tight ends suck. So I just save salary on a slate where realistically we really want to save salary because maybe that Ian Thomas lets you get up to, Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, and Mike Davis in the same lineup. And then maybe if all of them go off, it's not all that significant that Ian Thomas doesn't have a good game. So that's why I think that he's really viable for the slate. Only a few minutes left. So guys, if you have questions, throw them into the chat and I'll get to them as we wrap up the show. DSTs, do you have any defense takes for this slate? I know that the field is all over the Bills. Buffalo rostering well over 50% of lineups on DraftKings. On FanDuel, 40% of lineups. So everybody's flocking to the Bills. Do you think that ownership's too high, or are they just safe enough that you're fine with throwing them in there?
So here's one take for a defense, and again, it's not really that I would try to get off the Bills personally. I think the Packers are in an okay spot if you can get up to them. Now it's harder to get up to the Packers, obviously, but they're obviously at home too. It feels like maybe a spot where, the Packers defense just it finally makes a bit of a stand. And it's not like Teddy Bridgewater's a opponent that I want to necessarily have my defense up against. But, this is a Packers defense who scored double digits 2 of their last 3 games. And it's not the worst matchup either. So I think I would rather get up to the Packers if I could. But the interesting place, if you're going to start Josh Allen, think about a possible negative correlation with Denver. If Denver does get like some kind of fluky, and look, Josh Allen's running around, he can fumble, obviously, he still throws the odd like bad ball. If they just get a quick score, Josh Allen's just going to throw more and more and more. So I feel like that negative correlation might actually end up being like a good correlation on the slate. It's something to think about. If you are going to do the Denver thing, KJ Hamler sometimes returns kicks. I'm pretty sure he did at one point this year. So again, that could be a move, but that's kind of how I'm viewing defense. I don't think the Bills are a bad play. I think if I can in GPPs, I'd rather get up to Green Bay, but just eating the chalk here is fine too. Cause Drew Lock, quite frankly, is a turnover machine. So it's really not, it's not a bad, so you got to eat some chalk, right? And Greg, it's good for you. So you might as well just do it here.
Yeah. That's how you grow up to be big and strong. But the Bills defense, I'll say this, if you're playing cash games, you roster the Bills defense. GPP, though, there's so much variance in defense scoring, and that's really the reason I just don't like defenses in fantasies because it's so hard to predict. And the defense could play really well, and it doesn't necessarily always translate to fantasy points because you could have a bad defense gets a punt return for a touchdown, and all of a sudden you just have a defense that plays really well. So with that considered, nobody's playing the Panthers defense. They're 2,200 on DraftKings. They have 4% ownership. I certainly think their odds of being in the optimal lineup is higher than 4% just because defense is such a highly variant position. And like I said, all it takes is, there's a snap that goes over Aaron Rodgers' head that somebody picks up and returns for a touchdown. There's a punt return for a touchdown. Or you just have a situation, which is probably the most likely one, that all the defenses score between like 4 and 8 fantasy points, and it doesn't matter, and you just want the cheapest one anyway. So with nobody on the Panthers defense, I'm fine with them as a GPP defense, just from the standpoint that it puts you on a different roster build. And ultimately, defense generally doesn't really matter unless somebody just breaks the slate and scores a touchdown, which also happened on the last 2 game slate, happened on Thanksgiving slate where the Texans defense just destroyed for fantasy purposes. But beyond that, I think the Panthers defense is more viable than the field recognizes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that philosophy because again, you can save money by taking that approach, right? You can save quite a bit. So if you're struggling, if you're like, I don't want to get off Cole Beasley or something, just ride the variance, man. Like I'm pretty sure we saw this on the last 2 game slate too, where it just didn't even matter what just the cheapest defense ended up being like the highest scoring play by like a point or something. So something like that happened anyways. And I think, again, I think you just go. I think that's a good play for GPPs. Again, if cash game lineup, sure, if you can get up to the Bills and make solid lineup, I just do it, and you can differentiate elsewhere. And again, for cash games, it's different because everyone's gonna have the Bills. You probably want to be on them anyways. So.
All right, and that is going to bring us to lock. So, guys, if you watched, if you're still hanging around, you didn't do it yet, do us a favor, give us a like, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the YouTube channel. That will help you know when we're going live with all our shows. And there's more of them to watch today. We've got NBA Live Before Lock coming up. I'm going to be doing that with Adam Schur later. And then we also have NFL Showdown Live Before Lock for the Sunday night game. So still plenty more content to come on the channel. So stick around, check out those shows. Jordan, play the music out.